Astonishing Legends Network.
Thanks to our sponsors and Patreon supporters, Astonishing Legends is free to listen to. We appreciate your support of them and us.
January 21st, 1997. We're back in the Scole hole in Norfolk. The room is pitch black, stripped of light, and heavy with anticipation. The only way in or out is closed, locked, and light sealed. There are no windows to worry about. But tonight, the focus isn't on the mediums. It's not on Robin Foy or Diana Bennett. The focus is on a small, crude object sitting on a wooden base in the center of the table. To the uninitiated, it looked like something a child might cobble together from a Radio Shack kit. Yeah, we know, some of you probably don't remember Radio Shack. But on the table, there's a clear plastic box, 2 high-resistance coils packed with enough wire to generate a massive 5,000 ohms of impedance, a sliver of germanium semiconductor held in place by a thin copper strip, and a contact screw filed down to a razor-sharp point. Germanium is a semiconductor, the primitive grandfather of the silicon chip that runs your laptop or iPhone today. Back in the 1940s, it was the magic rock that made the very first transistors possible. They called this box the Germanium Receptor. According to the laws of electrical engineering, this device should have been a paperweight. It had no power source. It had no tuner. It was a closed loop of wire and crystal rock that shouldn't have been able to pick up a local AM radio station, let alone a signal from somewhere we struggle to understand. But the instructions for building the receptor hadn't come from a textbook. They'd appeared on a roll of sealed film, delivered by the very entities they were trying to reach. The so-called spirit team of scientists who claimed they were building a bridge, not of the now derided ectoplasm, but of energy. So, in the dark, they connected the output to a standard amplifier. They turned up the gain, and they waited. At first, nothing. Just the hiss of the void, whatever that is. But then, the static began to change. It started to pulse. It started to find a rhythm. And suddenly, cutting through the white noise, a voice emerged. It wasn't a whisper from the corner of the room. It was a metallic, distinct transmission coming directly through the speaker. It was Thomas Edison's infamous soul phone realized. A moment of impossible physics. But that moment in 1997 was the finish line. And to understand how they earned the right to that moment, and why anyone should believe it actually happened, we have to go back. We have to rewind to 1995, because before there was a breakthrough, there was an investigation. And the investigators were not believers by any stretch. They were the toughest skeptics in the world, well educated in the sciences, and probably convinced this was all a hoax before they even arrived. Tonight, we open the files of the famed Society for Psychical Research, or SPR. We meet the skeptics, the scholars, and the magicians who came to Norfolk, not to believe, but to expose. And they had their work cut out for them.
Welcome back to Astonishing Legends. I'm Scott Philbrook, and this is Dr. Arthur Ellison from Dan Drazen's documentary, Scole, the Afterlife Experiment.
When a second-rate scientist says that this could not possibly happen, and many do in connection with the paranormal, they are saying, in effect, that our current set of scientific models are the last word. And it would be ridiculous to say that. Scientific theories, descriptions change all the time, and we must expect that to continue.
Dr. Arthur Ellison, lead investigator for the Scole Report, former 2-term president of the Society for Psychical Research.
Join us tonight for part 2 of our 3-part series on the Scole Experiment.
And we're back! Oh, did you like that?
I did, actually. That was pretty good. I didn't know you could do that. Very talented.
I didn't do that. That was our wonderfully talented editor, Sarah.
Well, folks, we are back. It is time for part 2 on the Scole Experiment. We hope you came back because so many unbelievably wild things are happening here that while we were putting this together, we had to constantly drill back down into our sources and be like, this can't be real. I didn't believe it. I wanted to cross-verify things. Every time I was like, really? That's what happened? And yeah, it's true.
Yeah, I know. It's one thing hearing about it. It's definitely a different thing when you're experiencing it because it got real for you.
Yeah, there's an interesting Easter egg tonight, as it were.
We'll hear about that tonight.
At the end of part 1, we threw you into the deep end in 1997 with the idea of the Germanium Receptor. And we did that for a reason, because if we didn't tell you up front that they eventually got a machine to work that shouldn't have, then the next part of the story might just sound like a bunch of people sitting in the dark holding hands. It's easy to get lost in the weeds of the seance room if you don't know there's more to it.
Yeah, the Germanium Receptor didn't just appear out of thin air. It was the result of 2 years of intense sessions, note-taking, and interaction. But it would have been cool if it did appear out of thin air, because other things were appearing out of thin air. Also, I love when you get instructions for something from the great beyond that end up working. It's a little like the Ouija board naming itself.
Oh, God, yeah. I love that. I love when we found that out on our Ouija series. Like, what? That's
if you believe
a little strange.
That anecdote, yes.
I think we should maybe reset the clock here just to get people back up to speed.
Yeah.
So we're leaving the private years of part 1 of this series behind. It's early 1995. The Scole group, Robin, Sandra, Alan, and Diana, have been sitting in that cellar for 2 years. Not continuously, of course.
Yeah, they went up for minutes. Right.
It smells really bad. No, just kidding. So they've seen the lights. They've felt the touches of seemingly disembodied hands. They've had the apports, but Robin Foy is a smart guy, and he knows that in the world of parapsychology, if you don't have independent witnesses, you don't have anything. It's like the tree falling in the forest problem.
Right, or I guess a trumpet flying across the room, and no one with a PhD is there to see it. Didn't really happen. But as we know, of course, that can happen too, and then people still won't give it any credence, but we get it. But think about it. Maybe you were just tired and suggestible. You're wanting this to happen, so it did, kind of a thing. Well, Robin knew that to move the needle, he had to bring in the heavy artillery. So, as we said in part 1, he issues an invitation to the Society for Psychical Research, the SPR, founded in 1882 by Cambridge scholars. And their entire raison d'etre is to apply scientific rigor to the paranormal.
But when the SPR shows up, they aren't bringing sage and crystals, which, yes, I have downstairs right now. And later you'll understand why I need to get them back out. They're bringing graph paper and skepticism and maybe a TI-99 4A. Look it up. But the SPR team that they sent to Scole was heavy. This wasn't the JV squad. This was the A team, known as the Scole Investigation Committee. And it consisted of 3 primary investigators, though 4 others eventually rotated in. We'll collectively call those guys the Forensic 7. You might have met some of them in part 1, but let's recap quickly on the power players. Leading the charge, you have Montague Keene, or Monty. He was a journalist, a farmer, an agricultural administrator, and a longtime member of the SPR. He was the detail guy. Then you have Professor Arthur Ellison, who's at the center of a lot of stuff tonight. He's an electrical engineer and a professor at City University in London.
Yeah, but why does that matter, you ask? Because the Scole phenomenons were physical. We're talking about lights, sounds, levitations. And if you're going to fake that in 1995, you're using wires and servos and little motors here. LEDs, magnets, hidden speakers, all those things that some friends of ours like to point to as likely culprits. And sometimes that happens, but we got to rule that out, right? So Ellison knew exactly how all of that worked. He'd spent years debunking people who used trickery. And he wasn't there to be amazed. He was there to find the battery pack and the wires and the remote controls. They did have IR. They did have remote controls. Remember that? We're not that old.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Not that long ago. And then finally, you have with these 3 from SPR, David Fontana. He's a psychologist. His role was different. He wasn't looking for wires. He was looking for us. He was looking for the human element. Deception, collusion, mass hysteria. How many times do we have to say this phrase?
It's such a catchphrase, in it.
Yes, we put that phrase to bed on some earlier episodes, so just know that. But He was there to make sure the group wasn't just feeding off each other's delusions. So you've got a journalist to record the facts, an engineer to check the physics, and a psychologist to check the minds. But before they even sat down, they tore that room apart.
Right. So let's talk about that aspect here. So what did they do when they got there, Scott?
Well, the first thing they did was inspect the skull hole. Now, remember, this is a small cellar. It's 16 by 13 feet. Not a lot of places to hide, but they looked anyway. Monty Keene inspected the floor. He was looking for loose panels, trap doors, hidden compartments where you could stash a trumpet or a reaching rod if you wanted to cheat.
Right.
He found nothing, solid concrete and stone. Arthur Ellison inspected the table, checked underneath it, checked the legs, which weren't even really legs, but more like panels fastened together. He was looking for electromagnets, for wires to control levitation. He too found nothing.
That's right. Then they checked the chairs. They checked the walls, even the door. And for an example here, people wanting to know what could happen, our friend, who's a skeptical investigator of the paranormal, Kenny Biddle, once told a story about going into it's one of the more famous haunted places. But as we know, these things don't pay off like a slot machine when you put your coins in. So I think he said he found speakers implanted behind the walls.
That's right. I can't remember where that investigation was, but yeah, he's got a great YouTube channel and show, folks. If you look him up, look up Kenny Biddle, Biddle, if you want to take a skeptical approach to a lot of the stuff that we talk about.
Right. So when you know how the paranormal sausage is made, that should be a t-shirt by now. You know what to look for. So that's what these guys were looking for. The doors, walls, anything physical, cracks in it. Remember, I think was it when we talked about the Watsika Wonder, I think it was Madame Blavatsky, what we had mentioned in part 1, they found a way that she was transferring letters. Now, this isn't to say, as we pointed out earlier here, that there couldn't also be something unexplainable going on, genuinely.
That's right.
But people like to compound things. So,
yes.
Talk about the door. How secure is it, right?
Well, it's very secure. It's the only way in or out.
Right.
Once it's closed, they're in there. And then the other thing about it is, it didn't just lock. If you tried to open it after it was closed, it kind of screamed.
That's a little Beauty and the Beast, right? The things coming to life in a scary way, though. So the Scole report makes a big point of this. The door led to an anteroom, and it was secured with bolts. But more importantly, the hinges were ancient and, of course, incredibly noisy.
If anyone tried to sneak in during a seance or one of these sessions, like, say, an accomplice in a black bodysuit, for example, they'd have to open that door.
Right.
And down there in the cellar, the squeak would have sounded like a gunshot. Also, you know what's hilarious is the idea of a stagehand type dude in a black leotard. I'm imagining Will Forte. Honestly, trying to sneak around that room and bumping into stuff.
Right.
In the dark. Anyway, the room has been checked. The door is sealed, but how do you control the mediums in the dark? That was the biggest point of contention. Robin Foy had fashioned his own luminous wristbands. They were Velcro straps with tabs that glowed in the dark. The idea is simple. If the investigators can see your glowing wrists, then they know where your hands are, what you're up to.
Right. But no, I think that has been a trick with people in black bodysuits for some things, because to the audience, in a certain way, you can't see them. Now, I was at a Vegas magic show, big one. It was still very entertaining, but I think I figured out one trick where they make a Lamborghini disappear. And I'm not giving anything away, as that old Fox show said. Like, the magicians were really upset because he was giving away tricks. He said, look, these are really old hackneyed tricks by now. Like, if this is your bag, you got to think of some other stuff. And therefore, I don't mind showing you how these are done. It also creates a lot of interest in magic when you are amazed by something. But the magician, they threw a large golden blanket over the car, and then he peels it back and it's gone, right? Except what I think I kind of figured out was that there's 2 layers to the blanket. There's a golden shiny one on top and a black velvet one underneath. So it's all about perception. This is what we're talking about here, is from every angle, what are you able to see and what are you able to detect when the lights are on? So they're looking at everything here. And the SPR, they weren't really happy with those homemade Velcro bracelets Robin had created. And Allison argued, Velcro is noisy, but a good magician could slip out of it. And that's what I love about magic, is that you think, okay, that's put to rest, right? They can't possibly do that. And a clever magician will figure out a way to override that with something that you think you've put to bed, right?
Yes.
So they inspected the wristbands, they tightened them, And in some sessions, they even brought in their own ties or insisted on holding hands directly. So again, great protocols here, right? They literally
Yes.
sat with an investigator between each sitter, so they wouldn't have been able to collude.
That's right. They also would put their feet on the sitter's feet.
Right.
So they couldn't move. They've got their foot on top of the other person's foot. They're holding their hand. So even without the Velcro, they can't move. And by the way, we should mention James Webster, because he wasn't one of the academics, but he was probably the most dangerous person in the room for a fraudster or a hoax. He was an associate of the inner magic circle.
Yes, that's what I'm talking about. That's what you need.
Yeah.
You need it in the mix. Again, somebody who knows all the tricks, literally. Now, a scientist thinks linearly, if A plus B equals C, that makes sense, right? That's logical. You can repeat that. If I see a ball float, there must be a magnet. If I check for a magnet and there isn't one, then the ball must be floating. Could be air, right? But a magician thinks laterally. A magician knows they can misdirect you away from any part of the trick.
Yeah, that's right. It's kind of like what you were saying about the blankets on the Lamborghini. Well, Webster at this point had spent 4 decades learning how to trick people, and he couldn't find anything strange in the street farmhouse cellar. He is the amazing Randy in this scenario.
Right. So Webster famously said, after sitting at Scole, quote, "I have been a magician for 40 years, and I have never seen anything that could replicate this under these conditions," end quote. Under these conditions is the key phrase here, because usually when you bring this level of scrutiny into a seance room, when you lock the doors and you tape the mouths and hold the hands, the ghosts get shy. Now, as we mentioned before, it can seem like, how convenient when you do this, or you can't use infrared. Of course it doesn't work.
Right.
Well, there are other reasons going on too, that again, it's like fishing. It's like, why can't you use this rattle noisemaker and still catch fish? Well, there's a reason for that. It disturbs things. Anyway.
The shy effect is the skeptic's best friend. It's the Michigan J. Frog of paranormal investigation.
Ancient Warner Brothers Looney Tunes reference. Well, maybe some people will know it, folks our age. But for the rest of you, it's the observer effect, what we're talking about here essentially. In quantum physics, observing a particle changes its behavior. Through many mainstream experiments, that's been proven to be true. And in parapsychology, observing a medium often stops the phenomena. Now, there is a theory about this, actually. Kenneth Batchelder called it witness inhibition. I like that. Yes. Batchelder theorized that if telekinesis, or PK, is real, it's a mental force. And like any mental force, it can be blocked by doubt.
Right.
Now, I have a thing to say about this. So just imagine you have a skeptic in the room radiating, this is fake, that's baloney. That skepticism might act like a jammer shutting down the signal. Now, one thing I remembered about the Philip experiment, and everything in general nowadays, of course, it's very fashionable to talk about manifestation. But one thing I've heard from the Philip experiment is that you had to go in with a mindset that not only this is possible, but that you fully expect it to happen.
Right.
And that aided it greatly.
This actually makes me think of what happened to Uri Geller, his famous appearance on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson all those years ago, where, he's the famous spoon bender. Right. A lot of you will know who he is, but for folks who don't, just look him up, Uri Geller, Geller. And that experience on YouTube for him, it was a bad experience. And if you watch it, you feel bad for him. It didn't work out. And Carson was super incredulous and pretty mean to him and ambushed him. But by the same token, he's just trying to show, he had his own agenda of like, this isn't real, this is all bull, and you shouldn't believe him. And maybe that's true, but Geller has gone on to do a bunch of amazing things before and after that. I always thought, that it was possible that he was inhibited by the way he was ambushed on the show. On live TV, you're already a wreck from being on live TV. I don't care how confident you are, unless you're Robert Downey Jr. or whatever. You could, so that's an example of what might be happening in that scenario.
Well, yeah, there are discussions of it. I think we'll try to remember to have that clip in there, but you can easily find it if you search on YouTube. Yeah. But if you watch it, what's uncomfortable, of course, is that it doesn't work. He said, no, this isn't right. I'm not feeling it. Whatever. It's like, okay, there you go. Now you're suddenly on TV. Now it suddenly doesn't work. But as Scott said, you have to imagine the scenario here. If you don't remember the Tonight Show, there was always like, they'd play the music out when they go to commercial, and there was a card, there's an old fashioned graphic that was made, a graphic card that they showed. Then they go to another commercial. And so after that failed, it was like the whole audience was silent. It was just very awkward and tense. Yeah, he didn't appreciate it. But if you hear his explanation, Uri's, afterwards, he said, yeah, the producers, of course, it's not just Carson himself. Because think about it, if he did do it, it's great television. That's what you want. You want the audience to go, ooh, wow, just kind of, and be mystified.
It was a chain of custody on the spoon thing.
Yeah, so he said they purposely added stuff, they switched things around, beforehand. They were trying to trip him up. But like I said, it made for interesting television, but it wasn't, the wow factor that they wanted. It was just like, that's, cutting the commercial in total silence. That never usually happened on The Tonight Show. Usually there's applause. So exactly. Anyway, well, if your power relies on your state of mind, whether from this side or the other, or if witnesses believe it or not, it affects the effect. It affects your power.
Right.
So the shy effect isn't necessarily the ghost refusing to perform. It could be a disturbance in the mojo, because remember, the living as well as the past are part of this equation. They both should be functioning for maximum effect.
If you believe any of this at all.
Well, yeah, well, just think about, just living among the living. Imagine being at work and you're trying to do a project and a team member just ain't having it. They're not participating. They got a terrible attitude. It doesn't come out well. If everybody's on board, it's like, let's get this thing done. Let's collaborate. Things usually go a lot better. So when Keene, Ellison, and Fontana walked into that cellar in February 1995, they expected one of two things. Either they would catch Robin Foy using a reaching rod, or the room would go quiet because their skepticism killed the vibe. They essentially expected a bust, but they didn't get a bust. They got a handshake.
All right, so tell me another story about someone you know who still insists on doing things the hard way, like they won't take advantage of one of our terrific sponsor offers, or is still somehow overpaying for wireless in 2026.
All righty then. So this one is about a friend and a coworker whose younger brother was a bit of a slacker. He lived with her, he had no job, so she had to set him up with a checking account, which he'd spent all the money she'd put in there for him. You get the picture. She'd even prepare meals and then put them in the fridge for him while she was at work. But when his slacker buds would come over to veg and game, of course they wanted pizza. So he'd charge one on his debit card with no money in his account. And I asked her, does he not realize that now, with the cost of the pizza plus bank overdraft fees, he just bought a $50 pizza? And I guess he didn't fully get it, or he didn't care, probably both. He just kept on doing it.
Oh, dang, man. Well, maybe it's one of those psychological things where you don't actually see the bills leaving your wallet, so it doesn't feel like it costs anything. Buy now, don't pay later.
Yes, that and laziness. But when you're an adult and you have to pay your bills, well, we all know that you will feel it in the wallet.
Oh, yeah, you do. But thank goodness, Mint Mobile is here to help with that. You can stop paying way too much for wireless just because that's the way it's always been. Mint exists purely to fix that. And of course, you get the same great coverage, same great speed, just without the inflated price tag.
Yep, Scott and I can attest to all that, and we love our plans and our service, and we know you will too. And this is the premium wireless you expect.
And for a limited time, get 50% off 3, 6, or 12-month plans of unlimited premium wireless.
And you can bring your own phone and number, activate with eSIM in minutes, and start saving immediately. No long-term contracts, no hassle. It's one of the easiest things you can do to save a ton of money and still enjoy the same great wireless experience Scott and I do. So much better than our old carriers, and my coverage and call quality improved to boot.
With a 7-day money-back guarantee and customer satisfaction ratings in the mid-90s, Mint makes it easy to try it and see why people don't go back.
Ready to stop paying more than you have to? New customers can make the switch today, and for a limited time, get unlimited premium wireless for just $15 per month.
Switch now at mintmobile.com/AL.
That's mintmobile.com/AL.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3 months, $90 for 6 months, or $180 for a 12-month plan required. That's $15 per month equivalent.
Taxes and fees extra. Initial plan term only.
Over 50 gigabytes may slow when network is busy. Capable device required.
Availability, speed, and coverage varies. Additional terms apply.
See mintmobile.com. Well, we're deep into the Scole Experiment tonight, talking about physical manifestations, A-ports, and things just appearing out of thin air. And it reminds me of my mornings, actually. I'll be standing in the kitchen, completely alone, making coffee, and suddenly, bam, an orange blur materializes at Mach 5.
Yeah, dust and fur flying everywhere. The biscuit manifestation.
Exactly. It's not ectoplasm or a spiritualist hoax, folks. It's just pure, unadulterated zoomies.
Ooh.
Since we rescued him from the drive-thru line a year and a half ago, he's gone from a scrappy little guy to a distinct personality. He's playful, he's a little destructive, RIP to paper towels and toilet paper, but mostly he's just an incredibly healthy cat, and we credit a lot of that to Smalls.
Well, that doesn't surprise me, and I'm glad you haven't made one of those Instagram reels showing cat behavior.
No, there's enough of those.
Well, after switching to Smalls, 88% of cat owners reported overall health improvements. Now, that's a pretty massive number.
It really is, but it makes sense when you look at the bowl. Smalls fresh cat food is protein-packed recipes made with preservative-free, 100% human-grade ingredients you'd actually find in your fridge. Before Smalls, I think we were all guilty of feeding our cat stuff where you look at the label and go, what is that ash content?
Ooh.
But with this, you just see real meat.
Yeah, and you can see it's clearly working. That drive-thru rescue has a coat that looks like he was professionally detailed.
He really does. It's soft. He's at a perfect weight. And honestly, the biggest game changer, he doesn't have that horrible kitty butt anymore. That alone is worth the price of admission.
Yeah, and folks, starting is easy. You just share some info about your cat's diet and health, and then Smalls puts together a personalized meal plan, so there's no more guessing in the pet aisle.
We actually did the taste test, and we put the old stuff next to the Smalls. He didn't even hesitate. He went straight for the Smalls. And if you're skeptical, the team at Smalls is so confident your cat will love it that you can try it risk-free. They'll refund you if your cat won't eat it.
Yeah, there's a reason Cats.com named Smalls their best overall cat food.
So stop guessing which meal is going to upset their stomach. For a limited time, because you're an Astonishing Legends listener, get 60% off your first order, plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/AL.
One last time, that's 60% off your first order, plus free shipping when you head to smalls.com/AL.
Forrest and Scott, thank you for supporting their sponsors. I'm Fern Zito. Now, back to the show.
Imagine, it's February 1995, and one of the first sittings with the SPR. So the controls are really tight. Monty Keene is sitting next to Robin Foy. He's holding Robin's hands, and he has his feet resting on top of Robin's feet. And we described this in part one, but I know it was a lot. It was, for us mapping that out, it was a lot. So
yes,
this is what they call the four-limb control. Robin is effectively pinned. He can't move a hand without Monty knowing it, and he can't shift a foot without Monty feeling it. Now, the room is pitch black. They've done the Velcro check. Everyone is accounted for. And then, in the dark, Monty Keene feels something touch his head. This isn't a cobweb or loose hair. This isn't a draft. He described it as a large, masculine hand, and it rested on his head. Then it moved down and pulled his ear. And then, and this is the kicker, it grasped his hand and shook it.
Right. And during all this, he's still holding Robin's hand, right? On at least one of them.
Yeah, while he was holding Robin's hand.
Yeah, and somebody else would be on the other side of Robin holding his other hand, just so
Right.
everybody knows. They were interspersed. Scientist, psychic, scientist, medium,
Right.
scientist, whatever, investigator. So somebody was holding both hands.
Right, they're all locked down. There's nobody floating above
Yeah.
them. It wasn't things falling from the ceiling. Now I just keep thinking
Right.
back to how humorous this could have been, especially if the trickster spirit wanted to really put one over on people. Getting back to Pontefract when the ant comes over, right, and they see it's like the Mickey Mouse gloved white hands conducting as they're singing
Right.
carols, and then they claimed a pitcher of milk came into the living room, floated in, and dumped all over the ant's head, who was giving them guff. So,
Right. There you go.
there you go. There's a joke played on you. But in any case, so this is what Monty wrote in his report. I felt a large hand grasp mine and shake it firmly. I am absolutely certain that the hands holding mine did not move. And remember, this is Monty Keene. This isn't a guy prone to flights of fancy. He's a reporter. He's recording this as physical fact. Quote, I was touched by a hand, end quote. And it wasn't just a fleeting touch. This was a strong physical interaction. This was a greeting, a literal handshake.
That's right. And it wasn't just hands showing up, it was objects.
Right.
This is where we get into the A-ports again.
Right. And this is where it's hard to deny stuff if you're there watching it. So again, in part one, we talked about apportation or apportation, the odd objects materializing and falling onto the table. And an apportation supposedly passes through matter, anything, through walls or ceiling, and then it materializes if it even travels at all. I don't know how the mechanics of that exactly work, but it's fascination.
We don't know where these things are starting.
Apportation is not apparently a word in the dictionary files here.
No, it's underlined in all of our outlines and notes as not a word.
Okay.
So
let's
get on that.
All right.
We're going to add that to our local dictionaries, I guess. But anyway, as the SPR investigation ramps up, the apports get bigger and weirder. We're talking about over 80 confirmed apportations during the course of the experiment. They are all detailed. Each object and occurrence is detailed in the back of the Scole diary, actually. So it's an appendix either in that or the report. I can't remember which one.
So we're going from odd event here to Amazon Prime. In the number of items is what we're thinking about here? Yeah.
80 items. So, and there's a detail about the arrival of these objects that I found in the notes, which really stood out to me. Whatever was landing on the table, it made a sound, a thud.
Right, as expected, depending on how the mechanics work, right? Does it just materialize on the surface? Does it materialize a few inches above in midair and then
It
thud?
seemed to be coming down from the ceiling. But the other thing that's really weird is the witnesses described a heavy, loud sound that would be disproportionate to the object.
Right.
So even like a small item, like a coin or a pendant, would hit the table with a loud bang, as if they've been dropped from a great height or as if they were incredibly dense.
Yeah, that is interesting physics right there, because I often think about, how do they materialize knocks? How do knocks happen?
Right.
Is there a ghost hand that's actually knocking on a solid physical surface? Or is it a sound that just they can, like somebody... Cameron in Ferris Bueller's Day Off making the pop sound with his mouth. It's nothing. Is it something that they can just do, or that's part of the phenomenon? So if you think about teleportation or whatever this is, maybe when whatever is arriving, it rematerializes, there's perhaps a displacement of air. It's a little bit like a shockwave. Oh, like our friend the mantis shrimp or the pistol shrimp, right?
Yeah, they move so fast, they give off light, and then the heat that you just talked about, it's wild.
Yeah, hotter than the sun. Which
unbelievable.
Is all done to stun other prey floating by.
Well, it stuns me when I just see it on YouTube. So
well, that's the amazing thing. Like I said, there's physics behind that, but we understand that a little bit better.
So back to 1995, the Helen Duncan newspaper.
We told that story in part 1.
A quick refresher for context. Helen Duncan was a Scottish medium. She is famous or infamous for being the last person in Britain to be imprisoned under the Witchcraft Act of 1735. That was in 1944 during World War II.
Which is funny and ironic to me is that how did she know that? It must be witchcraft. Well, or you're just a spy. But Helen Duncan is a martyr figure in spiritualism. And one night at Scole, in the dark, a large object flutters down and lands on the table. And then when they turn on the lights, it's a pristine copy of the Daily Mail, of that paper, that newspaper issue, that thing that people used to fold and get ink on their hands with.
Yes. And that it's from April 1st, 1944. The headline is about Helen's trial. It's a perfect historical artifact. Now, the skeptic says, okay, Robin Foy bought an old newspaper on eBay and dropped it on the table.
Right, which would be a valid theory, except for the analysis, which there are some details we didn't talk about in part 1.
Yeah, the SPR sent the paper to the Print Industry Research Association, PIRA, P-I-R-A. They did a full chemical analysis. Now, if this were fake, printed yesterday, the paper would contain modern additives, bleaches, fillers, chemical brighteners that didn't exist in the 40s.
Yeah, and modern paper chemistry is completely different. And if you watch any of those fascinating docs about historical document forgeries, old book forgeries, you learn about that stuff. It's fascinating, yeah.
And so the lab at PIRA, they found none of that. They confirmed the paper was chemically identical to wartime stock. It was the real deal. It lacked all of the modern impurities.
Okay, so then it's just an old newspaper, you say?
Yeah, but that's the problem. If it's old, it should be yellow, it should be brittle. The acid in the wood pulp breaks down over 50 years. This paper, white, pristine, flexible, looked like it had just come off the press. That's
right. So chemically, it looks like it's from 1944, but physically, it hasn't aged a day. And you could say like, oh, so well, somebody planned this and they put a newspaper into a sealed, physical, hermetically sealed bag or chamber.
In 1944. They would have had to plan this hoax.
It's a long ways to go
40
for
years earlier. Yeah, it's a temporal impossibility. It's like it was printed in 1944, fell through a wormhole and landed on the table in 1998. without passing through the intervening 50 years of aging and degradation.
Right. So maybe the spirit team didn't just move the object through space, they also moved it through time. And then there's space time. And does that any that really exist? Or maybe they preserved it in a way that defies that type of entropy. Or does some ghost hand actually go to the newsstand and drop a few coins like you see in the movies and grab a paper, tuck it in, like, I'll be right back. And then,
Well, and that's the thing. You talk about the entropy of decay, the fact that it didn't happen, that's going to become very important when we get to part 3. But for now, if they could materialize a newspaper, what could they do with film? So that's the handshake. We have a handshake. We have a newspaper from 1944 that looks brand new. But, and there's always a but, a handshake is subjective. A newspaper, no matter how weird, is still just paper.
True. And if you're a magician skeptic like James Randi, you're saying, show me the negative.
And the spirit team, which again is our ghosts, the people that they're interacting with, seem to understand this. They knew that to prove their existence to the 20th century, they needed 20th century proof. So they needed something permanent. They needed a photograph. The group had already gotten some amazing photographs, but now the SPR wanted to manage the chain of custody on the negative and the processed film to help with belief. Now, spirit photography, you've heard us talk about it on the show. It's the oldest trick in the book, dates back to the 1860s, double exposures, plate swapping, little cutouts of fairies. It's a minefield of hoaxes. And the SPR, of course, knew that. They are the ones that debunked a lot of that stuff in the early days. Arthur Ellison understood that if you hand a roll of film to a medium and they hand it back developed with a picture of a ghost on it, you laugh them out of the room. It's the substitution trick, as magicians say. And so the challenge was, how do you get an image onto film without anyone touching the camera, without using the lens, without the film ever even leaving the possession of the skeptic?
Yeah, it sounds like a magic show. And if you saw that in a magic act, listen, if you would understand that it's magic, there's a mechanical way that that's being produced. But in this setting, how's it being done?
Yeah, well, the answer for that came in the form of a German electrical engineer named Walter Schnittger. Now, Schnittger was an independent investigator who came in during the SPR period, and he decided he was going to build a trap. He constructed a special tamper-proof wooden box. This was designed to hold a roll of 35 millimeter film, but not just a container. It was sort of a mini vault.
This box is made of wood, but crucially, picture this, the screws go all the way through the box, all the way through the wood, so you can't just pop the top off.
Yeah.
And then after that, it's secured with a padlock.
Yeah, very Houdini.
You're trying to remove all doubt here, but it's also necessary for the SPR's sake. Schnittger has the key to this box. It's in his pocket. And then here's the protocol. Schnittger buys a fresh roll of Ilford film, which is a brand. We here in the States, we have Ilford, which would be imported, but it's also a Kodak, as if you're familiar with that. Ilford is the major brand of film in the UK. He then secretly marks the canister with a scratch or a signature, so he knows it's the specific roll he bought. He then puts the film in the box. And then he locks the box, and then, and this is the most important part, during the seance, the box sits on the table in front of him, and he keeps his hands on it.
That's right. This is a locked room mystery inside a locked box mystery. So in January of 96, Schnittger is sitting there. He's holding the box. The lights go out. The energy builds. And then the spirits tell him to develop the film.
Okay, now how do they do that, though? They did that through Diana Bennett?
Yeah, in this case, she was in a trance state, so it would be her, but specifically as Manu, one of the primary spirit guides or part of the spirit team. This was January 13th of 1996, so the spirit was trying to enforce a chain of custody that would eliminate anyone from our living world thinking a hoax happened.
Yeah, and keep this in mind, folks, is that this is suggestions coming from a spirit in the ether, not as one of the participants. You have to, I know when we're going along, and this is when you're doing the research for this and reading up on sources, it's easy to lose sight of the fact because we're not used to this kind of interaction. You know what I'm saying? You're not used to some force, intelligence, some mind on the other side telling you how to go about this and getting suggestions for it. Usually it's just all the living trying to poke at the ethereal part, you don't get very many answers, or very, they're very sketchy and fragmented.
That's right. So Schnitger takes the box, the film, to the lab himself, personally watches the developer process it. And when the strip of film comes out of the bath, it isn't blank. It's covered in symbols, weird glyph-like markings. Some of them look like handwriting. Some look like diagrams. And remember, the film was never exposed to light. It was in a light-tight canister inside a light-tight box.
Yes, and I mentioned this last week, but this is called scotography, and it comes from the Greek skotos, meaning darkness, writing in darkness. And this is distinct from photography, which is photos, writing with light. Photography uses a lens to focus photons onto an emulsion, as we said before, when Scott said changing plates. We're talking about glass plates. So in the early days, you didn't have the mylar or the plastic or the celluloid that they did at the turn of the century, which was highly flammable. You had different materials. The earliest portable photographs that were taken, and was popular for a long time, is that you would coat a glass with the photographic emulsion. If you remember us talking about Shackleton's voyage with the Endurance, and they had great photographs, one of the reasons those got preserved is because some of those photographs that were discovered later were on glass in very cold water.
Right.
And that's why some of the photographs are amazing. Anyway,
yes,
so that's the process. In this case here, scotography bypasses the light, and it's the idea that consciousness, or energy, is interacting directly with the silver halide crystals on the film strip. Ted Sirios style. Remember that? Oh, listen to tell them about Ted Sirios and our good friend Rich.
Yeah, you've got to hear Richard Haddam's Paranormal Bookshelf on that. I can't believe we haven't covered it on Astonishing Legends yet. I really want to do that, even though Rich has done it. Our approach obviously be different because Rich's show is very different. Very cool. I love it. And I would have known about Ted Sirios if it wasn't for Rich telling us about him years ago, originally. So anyway, I think he was a doorman. I can't remember, but he could think images onto film.
Well, yes, he could.
It's pretty wild.
I too would want to cover this for the same reasons as you, but I think why it endears you is the one photograph of Ted Sirios really scrunching his face up, trying to imprint on that film, and it's very time period goofy comedy looking, but apparently he did it. And he had many jobs. I don't think he was a doorman per se, but he was a bellhop, or he worked at a hotel as a porter, essentially, if I remember correctly. But I think it was one of those guys, he'd had different jobs. And he was a little bit troubled, but a good-natured fellow. He was a hard drinker, and some of the sessions, as you'll hear in Rich's, like he was a little too drugged to perform well. So that's not so great. But there's nothing better than a true blue-collar average guy with some bizarrely fantastical supernatural powers.
Yeah,
because why would it be again? I know it's a trope. It's like, why is it always those kind of characters? It's like, well, do you expect some major scientist to be able to do this? Some really well-renowned scientist, and actually come out and say that to his peers, his or her peers? It doesn't, that's not going to happen. So it's going to be characters like this. It's a little like Pat Price, if you remember.
Deputy or whatever in Burbank.
Well, he was the police commissioner, so he had a high-level job.
The commissioner,
you've seen different. I think he was a sheriff at one point. You'll read different varying accounts of what he actually did, but he had a very distinct natural ability about it during the whole Project Stargate phase and era. And
Pat Price is one of the most fascinating people I think we've ever come across over the years.
Right.
But let's get back to what happened at Scole. They're getting information, not just random images, and sometimes the information was incredibly specific. In one instance, a strip of film appeared showing a complex technical diagram. It had coils, a resistor, and a piece of mineral.
That Germanium Receptor. It sounds like like something out of a Bond movie, doesn't it?
I expect you to talk to the dead, Mr. Bond.
That's funny. You say that actually Russell Targ, most of his expertise in his career was about lasers. So,
yes.
But explain the diagram on the film. This is 1996, right?
Yeah, this appeared on the film in 96. It was the blueprint for the Germanium Receptor. So, I mean, this chain of events is wild. The Spirit team used the medium of film to send the instructions for the machine that would eventually replace the medium of film. They faxed the schematics for the soul phone, figuratively, to the Scole group via a roll of Kodachrome.
Pretty amazing. Again, it's like a Rodave device where you're
Yes.
bypassing some kind of microphone and going right to the recording medium to eliminate that possible breakdown, like you said, in a chain of transmission of data.
Yeah, folks, look up Raudive. By the way, it's you'll never spell this without us saying it. If you don't, it's Raudive.
Yeah.
Really cool stuff. I actually have a collector album of the Raudive recordings on vinyl that was reissued. But anyway.
Yeah, that would be audio. Now we're talking visual. So
Yes.
I mentioned this in the cold open, but for folks who don't know what the soul phone was, Thomas Edison in his later years became obsessed with the idea that our personalities are physical life units, I think he said, that survive death. And he believed that if we could just build a machine sensitive enough, sort of a valve or highly delicate electrical apparatus, it could detect those units and let the dead communicate without all the noise of a medium or having to go through a human. And he actually told Scientific American in 1920 that he was working on this device, which the press later dubbed the soul phone, which is, I'd be okay with that name. That's kind of cool.
By the way, Forrest, I think I've recommended this to you, but have you seen either one of the Black Phone movies? They are so good.
I did,
And the boys that scared all the time actually had an executive producer and second unit director from the sequel, Black Phone 2. Maggie Levin, she was on this past October on their show talking about it. Anyway, those movies it's really good. I haven't seen the second one yet, but I saw the first one with my son. We loved it. And Ethan Hawke, I'm a huge fan of his anyway, so he's great in it.
Yeah, me too. I have seen the first one. The second one, I think it's relatively new. It came out,
yes,
right? So it's
just
out
came
now.
out a few months ago.
Okay, have not seen that, but it's very chilling and well done, and talks about that ITC kind of communication.
Yes, exactly.
But yeah, it's well done. It's scary, but not gory.
Yes,
in a sense, but disturbingly delicious. So
yes.
Anyway, I remember you talking about that kind of ITC communication as well, and you'll see it pop up in various films and mentioned, and I love it when it happens, and it's kind of like just thrown away. They don't.
Right.
It's just kind of a strange thing that happens. But imagine, if you're Robin Foy and you're faking all this, then you'd have to plan a film with a diagram for a machine you haven't yet built, so that in 6 months you can build the machine to fake a voice. So think about that for a second.
Yeah, and it wasn't just diagrams on the film. They also got poetry.
Oh.
And this is where the intellectual signature comes in, because Robin Foy is a brilliant guy, but he's a paper trade manager, like a B2B guy. We'll talk about that in part 3. He's not a literary scholar. And there's no reason to believe he was a poetry lover or writer who would hoax a poem out of thin air. But on one of the Scole film rolls, a poem appeared, written in a scrawling Victorian hand, and it was signed Diotima, which is Diotima.
Yeah, Diotima was the secret name a man named Frederick W. Myers used for his lover or muse in his private poetry. So it really is an insider reference. It's the kind of thing only the real Myers, or I guess a biographer, would know. But that's not all. Frederick W. Myers was one of the founders of the Society for Psychical Research, and he famously promised before he died that if he could communicate from the other side, he would. And he passed away in 1901.
The other thing that's fascinating about this man is that the messages, more often than not, appeared on the film rolls like it was a continuous canvas. So, they technically ignored the vertical. You talked about this in part 1, I think, a little bit.
Well, it's the frame lines, right. So
they ignored the frame lines, the vertical dividers, the sprocket holes. All of that, meaning that if you were hoaxing this, again, you'd have to basically unroll the entire can of film and hoax it in the dark as though it were a scroll of paper. One of these rolls was 1.3 meters or 4 feet, 4 inches long. So for the hoaxing step, you'd be working with a pretty long piece of rolled up film, which, by the way, would want to be coiling up the whole time, in the dark, theoretically. And then you'd have to be like off-site somewhere, like a secret location, I guess, in Scole somewhere, or a tiny village, or maybe it's further away. I don't know. But it all seems like a stretch, possible, but a stretch. Anyway, this poem from Frederick W. Myers is like the holy grail for the Society of Psychical Research, signed by the founder, which in and of itself makes me personally curious about the source. And that's with me leaning toward paranormal and supernatural communication here. My point is, it's a little too on the nose or perfect in the convince the SPR guys column. It's like right there, right down the middle. It's like, hey, here's a message from your founder signed by his secret girlfriend's name that he used for poetry in his internal journals. And also this guy who died in 1901 said that he would talk to us after he died if there was any way to do it.
Okay, so just a quick primer here for folks that are maybe only exposed to, pun intended, to digital photography. Picture how this would have to have been hoaxed, and that you take a SLR, a single lens reflex camera, like I'm sure you've seen in movies quite a bit if you don't have one at home, and there's a roll of unexposed film in the canister. To load the camera, you pull that out, you wind it on another spool on the other side, and the distance is probably about, depending on the camera, 3, 4, 5 inches across. And then as the film moves through the camera, you have an exposed frame, and then you hit the advanced, the winder, you advance the film strip to the next location, and you take another shot, and therefore you have frame lines. So to avoid all the frame lines, which is like, okay, so then if you're taking photos, you say somehow you're taking photos of this handwriting or these documents or these schematics, especially the handwriting where it's a long strip, there's no frame lines. So you would have to expose the whole thing to 7 or 8, 9 inches of film all at once, and then wind it back onto the spool. So this is an incredibly difficult trick, which seems very, very unlikely, if not impossible, in this scenario. And that's what I was talking about before in part 1, why when you have images that go across that frame line, especially like in film, as we were talking about I would love to cover her one day, Scott, is Dorothy Izat. Her last name is Izatt, and she's the woman who has this knack of photographing, you could say UFOs, but it's also the phenomenon in general. She was using an 8mm camera, or Super 8, to photograph this strange stuff out of her window. What I love, there's a great documentary about her and her life, and she just did hours and hours of photographic film footage. And while they're interviewing her in her kitchen, outside her kitchen window, you're seeing lights moving up and down in the distance. The phenomenon was happening while she's being interviewed. But they examined her film, and they never could really find out how she did it, because some of the images go over the frame line. The same way with a movie camera, is that the film is running through, you have a shutter, like a 5-bladed shutter, it's spinning around, and as that's happening, it's creating an image onto the film, onto the negative, that's within that frame, that square or that rectangle, 4x3 usually. So
I feel like we're identifying a feature that, and there's another one that's going to come up tonight. But, one of the things that I've said, Forrest, on the show over the years is like, as many things as we've done and as many things as we've covered, we've seen this common ground between stories that have otherwise no relationship to each other.
That's right.
People have never met. And sometimes it's a different genre. It's like a cryptid thing bleeding into a ghost thing. One of the main things, which I know is going to come up in this, I think tonight, later here when we get to our notes, but about EVPs, when you get them, electronic voice phenomena, when you're doing recordings on a paranormal investigation, at least for us and for a lot of people, questions get answered before or as you're asking them.
Yeah.
That is something people have said across the board about real EVPs. And here we have this interesting film thing that we're now connecting two stories that are completely unrelated about the exposures on the film transcending the dividing lines that would be present if it had been filmed in a camera or something like that.
Yeah, there is definitely a consciousness connection, which I think the Many Minds team of Spirits on the Other Side is trying to show us, is that it's all kind of connected. And consciousness, as we said in part 1, is a big part of this experiment and this phenomena, because here we have consciousness exist on the very basic level, existing beyond death. Whereas traditional science would say, like, no, it's just a biochemical reaction in your brain. When you die, it dies, it fades away. There's nothing extant about it. Nothing exists outside of your body. End of story. And here we're saying, like, no, it continues on. And as we're going to talk about some of the images found later on, there also seems to be a residual self-image. Remember the Matrix when they talk about, like, you notice your hair's shorter. You're wearing clothes that are kind of that you picture yourself in. And when you picture, it's like there's something that lasts beyond into the other side of, is that how you look? Are you set with that? Can you change that? Is it like a bad DMV photo? on your driver's
Yeah.
license? Can you be like, my eyes were
Can
closed.
I redo this? Yeah.
Can you redo this? What is going on there? And so then we're talking again. I want to mention her.
First, you have to stand in line forever at the spiritual DMV line.
Now you're
right
well,
for
that would
hours.
be yes. That would be like Beetlejuice. There's a lot of admin that goes on in the afterlife here. But the woman Stella Lansing, Lansing, and she was also able to capture things on film.
Right.
And again, the faces and the images of the people she called the occupants. And I can't remember
we
if
need
she
to do a whole film show. With Ted, Stella, everybody.
Yeah, because it's fascinating, but also her images went over the frame lines and they couldn't figure it out. That's why I was mentioning in part one, a photographic expert saying like, well, the way you would have to do this is that you can't be using a camera, but she was using a camera. Like I said, they examine the film. It's like, how does it go through a movie camera and bleed over the frame lines? That's seemingly impossible. And of course, all they got for an answer was, it's got to be some kind of a light leak.
Yeah.
You've cracked the camera physically, and that's how you're able to sneak those images onto the film. Well, this seems all very unlikely in this case.
So, how's the used car lot coming?
Oh, you mean the backyard? Well, since I'll be using Car Gurus to sell off my inventory, it's not such a daunting task.
Oh, well, I think folks might forget that you can also very easily sell your car with Car Gurus or check the value on a trade-in or just see what your car is worth. And on cargurus.com, you can sell your car for the best price and compare multiple offers in under 2 minutes.
Yes, and it really takes a lot of the worry and hassle out of it. But I think maybe for most folks like us, it's car buying that's fraught with worry and an unpleasant and daunting task, and sadly sometimes filled with regret. But with Car Guru's new search feature called Discover, you are in charge because you aren't bound by preset and limited filters in a search engine. All you need to do is simply type in what you're looking for in your own words, and Car Guru's Discover instantly pops up with real listings that will match your exact needs.
Yeah, Car Guru's Discover is super cool in the way it works because it'll search for cars based on the way you think. Take, for example, you're planning on lots of road trips, so you want a vehicle that has great gas mileage or all the seating or cargo space you need. You simply type that in, and Car Guru's Discover will give you real, shoppable listings that match. It really is the shop smarter, not harder way to find the perfect car you need.
Yeah, that is pretty cool. But say you're physically at the car dealership in person and you're overwhelmed by all the decisions and questions. Well, this is where the Car Gurus app in dealership mode gives you all the power on the lot because you can readily compare cars side by side with similar options. You can see deal ratings and price history and then estimate your final cost, all without feeling the pressure. It's like having a cheat sheet right at your fingertips.
With more than 4 million listings, Car Gurus has the biggest selection of cars, so it's easier than ever to find the right car and the right deal.
It's no wonder Car Gurus is the #1 most visited car shopping site, according to SimilarWeb's estimated traffic data.
Buy or sell your next car today with Car Gurus at cargurus.com.
Go to cargurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal.
That's cargurus.com.
cargurus.com. Looking at tonight's episode on the Scole Experiment, you really sense the weight of the Germanium receptor. This crude little box that, according to not only the participants, but the investigators, built a bridge to the other side.
It's fascinating, right? By all accounts, it shouldn't have even worked, but it did. They were building something for a future they couldn't see based on instructions from, well, wherever those entities were, which, by the way, my jury's out on that. But we'll get to that in part 3. Still, it makes you think about the bridges we're supposed to be building in our own lives. There's parallels, including when it comes to trying to figure out how to build them sometimes.
Exactly. And we're not talking about spirit phones. We're talking about the practical stuff. Most of us are just trying to navigate the spastic economic uncertainty we're currently living through. Between AI changing jobs and the market swinging wildly, it feels like we've been forced to take matters into our own hands to protect our futures.
Right, and a big part of that defense is life insurance. But here's the scary part, folks. A lot of people have it through their job, and you think you're set if you got that. But if you're unexpectedly laid off, you could suddenly be covered for nothing. Your protection just disappears with the job.
Yeah, it's a pretty heavy thought. You're likely underinsured, overpaying, or just haven't looked at your policy in a decade. But getting it right is simple, thanks to SelectQuote.
Yeah, SelectQuote has your back. For over 40 years, they've been one of the most trusted brokers, helping more than 2 million Americans secure over $700 billion in coverage. mission is simple: to find you the right policy for your unique needs. They shop, you save.
And unlike those one-size-fits-all companies, SelectQuote's licensed agents work for you for free. In about 15 minutes, they'll compare policies from top-rated carriers to find the best fit for your health and your budget.
And if you're worried about the process, don't be. They partner with providers offering same-day coverage up to $2 million with no medical exam required. Even if you have pre-existing conditions like high blood pressure or diabetes, they have partners with policies designed for you.
Head to selectquote.com and a licensed insurance agent will call you right away with the right policy for your life.
Life insurance is never cheaper than it is today. SelectQuote. They shop, you save.
Get the right life insurance for you for less and save more than 50% at selectquote.com/AL.
Save more than 50% on term life insurance at selectquote.com/AL today to get started.
That's selectquote.com/AL.
This is Brandon Dalo, and when I'm not composing the music to films and series like Small Town Monsters, I'm listening to Astonishing Legends. Now let's get back to the show.
Coming back to this film with the poem on it, the Diotima, I'm not sure how you say it, but the investigators took that strip and they compared it to the deceased Myers journals from the 1890s. Right. They brought in handwriting analysts, and the conclusion was the signature matched, the phrasing matched, the rhythm of the poetry matched.
Right. So now you have a ghost who isn't just making lights flash, he's writing new poetry in his own handwriting, or it's the guy. It is actually the guy.
Yeah.
Or is this just a perfect gift from the trickster spirit element like we just talked about? And I would love to know what modern AI technology could make of this in seeing patterns and analyzing.
Well, we could apply that now.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. Well, the evidence kept getting richer. In late 1996, they switched to color film, Kodachrome, and a strip appeared that became known as the Ruth film.
This one contained a stanza from a poem by William Wordsworth. But here's the catch. It wasn't the standard version. It was an obscure, amended version found only in academic drafts. And here's another side note for those photography shutterbugs out there, like myself, I guess, is that now you have Kodachrome, which is considered, quote unquote, a slower film. So it takes a lot more light to make an exposure.
Right.
That's kind of the inverse in chemical photography. So like Kodachrome 25 and slide film, it's a very low ASA or ISO speed. You need a lot of daylight or a strong flash to get an image, or it takes longer exposure to get something on there. But that's why it's so sharp. That's why Kodachrome images today still last and hold up, as opposed to Ektachrome, which was a faster speed film, different formulation, but you didn't need as much light. But also the dyes weren't as stable. So like, I think if you look at old films, you can see like they really look really blue.
Like faded.
Right. You get a bluish tint, but Kodachrome holds up very well. But again, not your ideal stock of film if you're trying to do something in very low or no light.
Really, really excellent. For me, at least top 20 song by Paul Simon. Definitely listen to that if you haven't heard it. It's amazing. And with the Ruth film, I want to point out the reason it was called the Ruth film was because the entity that mandated this film stock called herself Ruth. This was the member of the spirit team who was like, here's how we're going to do this now.
Yeah, that's also fascinating. It's like, again, the phenomenon naming itself or calling itself to the rules, which you think actually really are just passed on people.
Right.
To mostly, to some degree.
And the thing about this is, this implies that whoever wrote that on the film, the fact that it was Wordsworth had access to like deep cuts of English literature. They've gone all the way up the Sirius radio dial, which everybody's, a lot of people maybe don't have anymore, but I still have it in my car. And when you go way up there, you get the deep cut channels. That's where you'd have to go to get access to this kind of literature.
Well, at the very least, it's obscure.
The B-sides.
But it exists, right? So it's not
That's right.
New, it's not like William Wordsworth coming back and actually write, from the dead and writing something new. And then you have to compare that, which you could still analyze to see if it was in his style and writing all that. But now we have to distinguish this piece of writing. And actually, I love the style visually of the handwriting. It looks old-timey, but it looks like that was well done as executed. But we have to distinguish this from what's called the dragon film. That was a separate event using a very specific stock called Polaroid Polachrome.
Yeah, so you don't want to confuse this with the square Polaroid photos
Right.
You shake like Andre 3000, which, by the way, it turns out shaking a Polaroid does not help it develop faster. Still, great song, great song.
You don't need, it doesn't need air. Yeah, it's sealed. And so the old Polaroid, again, I worked for a photographer for a while, and he would do a test shot, and it was black and white. And the really old stocks, there's no plastic coating, okay? So it comes out of the roll.
Yeah.
It's immediate, but then I would take the shots, and it came with a little stinky emulsifier or emulsion thing in a plastic.
That smell is unforgettable. If you've ever been in a dark room, you will never forget the smell of those chemicals.
But it's kind of cool. So you'd coat over the Polaroid to keep that from oxidizing any further. But it was it would give it a glossy surface. So now we're talking about Polachrome being 35 millimeter slide film. Okay, like we're talking about Kodachrome. And it comes in a canister, and then it went into the lockbox like the other bits of film.
But because it's instant slide film, it develops itself. And on this roll, they got massive, vibrant, hermetic symbols, including the clear image of the dragon superimposed over the chemical layers.
Wow. And tucked right next to it appeared Greek letters and other symbols that seemed to reference alchemy. As above, so below. But the Spirit team wasn't done showing off. On another roll of standard 35 millimeter film, there was a portrait. It's a very clear profile of a man with a heavy mustache.
And it wasn't just any man. Most people on the team and people who look at this experiment these days are pretty sure that was Sir Arthur Conan Doyle magically appearing.
The creator of Sherlock Holmes. Arguably also one of the most famous spiritualists who ever lived. If you're interested as an analysis about his life, Lucy Worsley does a great documentary about his life that's on PBS. So I highly check that out if you're interested. Gives you some insight about the man. But what we're talking about here is this is also has meaning, him showing up here.
Yes.
It's like the team dropping a calling card because he was so into this and such a popular figure that you would recognize this. So here they gave us the founder of the SPR, Myers, and the most famous member of the SPR, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, on the same series of films. It's a bit of a who's who of the afterlife. But you want some celebrities thrown in there, right?
You do. And Doyle was also famously, in spite of being the author of Sherlock Holmes, famously tricked by some fairy pictures that were later definitively hoaxes, as admitted by the people who'd made them.
Okay, so it's the sisters, the young girls who had made that. Here's so you can discard all this and say, well, there you go, they admitted to it. But I always found this one comment because years later, one of the women who was a young girl at the time who did this, they were just really clever and into photography. She said, okay, the one you see all the time that's usually published, I think they took a series, it was like 6 or 8 photos that they had published or submitted. And she said, some of those are obviously faked. 1 or 2 are not. I love like, what do you mean by that? Like, and she said, no, in that role, again, that's that mix of like, somebody maybe capturing something real, but also augmenting it.
Yes, augmenting it later. And by the way, the film phenomena doesn't stop in the cellar. We're going to find out here in a little bit. When the group went to Ibiza, the entities actually introduced a new trick using standard Polaroid pack film. We'll get to that in a minute.
You may remember that. It's very popular still. And then now kids have little tiny Instamatic ones that they turns into stickers.
Yes, I have
lots of fun.
Actually.
Right. So the way a Polaroid works is with mechanical pressure in one aspect of it. The film passes through 2 steel rollers, and those rollers burst a pod of developer chemicals, like a spy cyanide capsule, you could say, at the bottom of the photo. And that spreads the reagent across the image area. So it squeezes that pack, bursts the chemicals, and that's what starts the development. It's a genius invention.
Yeah, it is. But if there's no rollers, there's no chemicals, there's no pictures. So what did the Scole group do? In the Ibiza experiments, they changed the protocol. They asked investigators to physically remove the film cartridge from the camera in the pitch black.
Right, which you should never do with instant film, but you can with regular film as long as it's totally dark.
That's right. And so they placed the raw film cartridge on the table in the dark. The spirits claimed they were imprinting images onto the layers directly. Then they told the investigators put the cartridge back in the camera and press the shutter solely to run it through the rollers and develop it.
Very clever again. So
Right.
it's in pitch black, you should not be getting any image, right?
Right.
So the camera really wasn't taking a picture. It was just turned into a developing machine.
Right. So the exposure happens on the table outside the camera, but when those photos came out, they had images, distinct faces, like profiles of people.
Yeah, and if that's a trick, it's a trick that involves manipulating chemical dye layers in the dark without leaving a single fingerprint.
Which brings us back to scotography, energy impressing directly on matter. It's the same principle as the touches or levitation. It's the manipulation of the physical world by a non-physical agency. And if they could do that to film, what could they do to sound? So we've moved from being touched to film, now from subjective experience to objective chemistry. But the Scole Experiment wasn't content with just being a silent movie. The team, the spirit team, wanted to speak.
Yeah, they didn't just want to speak, they wanted to broadcast.
All right, kids, you're listening to Astonishing Legends. I mean, truly, unless you just got here, you know what an EVP is, right?
You would imagine folks would, certainly,
Yeah.
especially since our experience at that place, which should not be named.
Yes.
But here's one thing I've realized about EVPs for something that's kind of an innocuous phenomena that seems to happen. It's very controversial with a lot of people, especially our listeners. Some people are like, well, that was cool. Some people are just like, I don't. Here's what's interesting. Most of the comments I've seen are accepting of a strange possibility like that, but they don't buy into EVPs.
Yeah. Well,
so it's an interesting stance in that, like, no, I think most of those are garbage.
I might have used to be that way. I'm not.
Until you get, it is one of those things when you get one yourself, and it's very directed towards you, as you may know, and it's very clear and it's in context, it has an effect on your outlook, shall we say.
Yes. Well, for the newbies here, EVP is the acronym for electronic voice phenomena. The quick overview is maybe you leave a recorder running in an empty room and later you hear a whisper, get out, help me, whatever. Or really, really angry screaming man that can't talk too good. But the Scole group wasn't interested in that kind of EVP, which would be a Class B or a Class C. They wanted a Class A high fidelity transmission.
Yeah, and the thing that doesn't escape me here is that by attempting to get that, you're acknowledging that EVPs are a real thing. You, the representatives of the SPR, are trying to get an EVP. So it's like, okay, let's entertain the possibility that that is a real thing that can happen.
Yes.
And so that there is some kind of imprinting. Now, you're just gathering the data. You're not trying to think about the implications of what the data means yet.
Right.
It's just that, okay, you can seem to get some kind of thing that sounds like a voice.
Yes.
So first of all, let's try and find out what that process is. And now we're not saying that if you believe that that's possible, that diminishes the scientific rigor aspect of it, because I don't think it really does. If anything, it shows that they're willing to get outside of the box thinking about how this all might work. And then you're looking into that phenomenon as well. Well, if you're getting voices, what does that mean? Where are they coming from? How's that happening? But on the other hand, they only agreed to use a recorder, meaning one that had no microphone. So again, now we're talking about the Rodave idea. So to prove that this wasn't just Diana throwing her voice, which has been, accused of past things, Betsy of the Bell Witch, or young children, especially being extremely good ventriloquists in a lot of cases.
Jeff the Talking Mongoose.
That's all they can come up with. It's like, okay, so here's
ventriloquism.
Here's a young kid who's just really good at it. Or maybe you have something like a hidden speaker on a wall, which we were talking about. They decided to remove the mechanism of hearing, of recording, receiving sound vibrations entirely. And on top of that, they brought their own tapes, which were still wrapped in their original packaging. So this eliminates the possibility of a magician's force or substitution trick. So on November 15th, 1996, the group takes a standard cassette recorder with them, but before the session starts, they physically remove the microphone. They disconnect it entirely.
So for you non-audiophiles out there, a tape recorder works by converting sound waves in the air into electrical signals via a diaphragm in the microphone. Those signals are then written on a magnetic tape. So if you take out the microphone from that tape deck, then it's micless. It can't hear you scream. It can't hear a pin drop. It's basically a brick with a motor. Now, if you press record on a micless deck, you should get nothing but the hum of maybe the internal circuitry or maybe a little hiss at the most.
Yeah, you'll get some of that. I remember one of my favorite all-time gifts, my dad got me a tape recorder, cassette recorder back then because they were affordable. But I spent hours just playing around with that, and that's what you get. It's like, oh, can you get anything when you unplug the mic? Like you said, you should get some maybe mechanical noise or hiss, but really no voices or anything. Unless, of course, the signal isn't coming from the air.
Right.
Unless it's being induced directly onto the magnetic head. So as we talked about in previous shows, that's all kind of the same idea, whether it's video. You have, it's like the old megaphone is that, remember the old film of Caruso, I think, the opera singer famed, singing into a megaphone, basically the old Victrola cone, right? And he's singing into it, and that is vibrating a needle into vinyl, and that's what's putting his voice down onto that. Same thing. After that, for a long time, they had roller discs, a machine that would do with Edison's recording device. It says you're vibrating a needle, it's going onto a medium, and then when you play that back, it's basically playing back that vibration. So that's what we're talking about here, direct voice going into laying down onto the medium here, direct induction. So it's the audio equivalent of scotography. So instead of you burning an image onto the film, you're burning an audio signal onto the tape.
So they set this micless recorder in the middle of the table. They put in a fresh tape. They hit record. The session goes on for a while, and then the entities speaking through the medium tell them he's going to bring some music, but this is very special music. The composer of the music is going to play it himself.
Right. So they stop the tape, they rewind it, and when they press play, it isn't silence. It wasn't static. It was music, loud music. It's incredibly loud. And it was the blast of an orchestral music riff here. We're talking specifically Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Not a subtle choice there. Very grandiose. And I do wonder if that was Rachmaninoff from the other side actually playing that. But
you never know.
Or yes, musicians from the other side. Why wouldn't they get together too?
Right.
So as you heard, it's a big, sweeping, emotional piece of Romantic era classical music. It's very heavy. It's dramatic. It's making a statement.
Yeah, it's a wonderful piece. And here's the thing about the recording quality. It didn't sound like someone playing a record in the room. It didn't have room tone. It didn't have the reverb of the cellar. It was clean. It sounded like a direct line-in connection.
What you mean their line-in is actually plugging in straight into the device.
That's right.
Some people must still do that these days, right? We don't have VCRs or things to plug into.
Yes.
So this all makes sense if you're talking about magnetic induction, meaning if you bypass the air, then you bypass the acoustics of the environment. You bypass the echo, and you're likely to get a pure signal.
Yeah. So I'm an old audiophile, right? Meaning, yes, I'm physically old, but more meaning I used to be super into it, but it got expensive. So now I have older audio gear, but when it came out, it was state of the art. And one of the amps I have, well, not a tube amp because I was never at a point in life I could afford one of those. But it does have what's called a pure audio mode.
Right. Now explain what that does.
Okay. So this is an Onkyo receiver amplifier. It's called the TX DS898. You can Google it. There's still some out there on eBay and stuff. I see one right now. It's just $150. That's a steal. This amp is unreal. It's THX certified and all that jazz. But it also has this pure audio mode. And when you select it, it turns off all the circuitry inside the amp that's not relevant to the listening source you're currently using. I use this mode to this day with vinyl when I'm playing records. That way there's no chance of any electrical noise or hiss or anything else bleeding over inside the amp onto the circuits dedicated to bringing me that sweet, sweet analog sound.
Very cool. And It does sound better. Oh, also, there's a video equivalent of that as well. When you and I worked in post-production video, you may know, is with the format Beta SP, the decks had what we used to call dub mode or machine to machine, which means
Yes.
it's not going through other circuitry, which would degrade it very slightly. It's the
Right.
cleanest transfer of a video image from one videotape recorder VTR deck to another, which you're
Yes.
separating out the signals and making it more direct. And so if you know in the back of your old VCR, if you remember, there's component and composite.
That's right.
Composite is all the signals combined together, less quality. Component is separated out, more direct.
That's right.
But this sounds better, right? You can notice a difference?
I truly think it does sound better. Of course, there's the distinct possibility that Onkyo just put a blue light ring around a button and it's like pressing the elevator call button over and over, like it's super fast to make it get there sooner.
Oh, it is. So it's just marketing. It doesn't do anything. Is what
That's
you're
a
saying.
distinct possibility.
I see.
And audiophiles are suckers for that. Although I'd like to believe Onkyo is an honest company. I digress. But the point is, this tape recorder has no microphone, yet somehow the pure audio version of Rachmaninoff is on the tape. But there's a very specific technical detail here I want to flag.
Mm-hmm.
The Scole Group and their supporters claim that when you analyze the waveform of these recordings, they didn't look like normal sound. Normal sound, human speech, music played through the air, is a sine wave. It curves. It's analog. We've all seen a sine wave.
Yep.
It's like an S on its side that keeps going. But they argued this recording had characteristics of a square wave. It looked more like digital data. It looked like on-off pulses.
That's fascinating. So you might be suggesting here, or what it's suggesting is that this really wasn't acoustic at all. It's a direct manipulation of the magnetic particles that are on the tape. It's almost like they were writing the sound rather than playing it. So quickly here, like what we're talking about is analog going down, as analog signal
Yes.
Going down. When you have a digital recorder, that's ones and zeros. That's bits of data.
Right.
Or DAT, digital audio tape, that's how it's laid down. And like, for example, when you fast forward you don't hear like, the squeaky, you hear it like, it comes out as bits. It's like,
that's right.
And so you're hearing bits of information. Same thing also when you fast forward a digital audio tape, you don't see sped up. When you have a D2, remember that format, and you hit fast forward, it's
I do.
pixelized.
No civilian's going to remember D2, but
no, some folks out there. But it was just a format. Yeah, when you put on fast forward or rewind, you're not seeing just sped up motion. You're seeing it pixelated. You're seeing bits of information at a high speed.
Now, we had to point out here that the SPR's two audio investigators did not agree with this assessment of it being digital audio. One of them, Tony Cornell, thought that the patterns didn't necessarily meet that description. He felt like that he could see breathing and hear breathing and room reverb in there. And the SPR's own audio expert, the other one, Franklin, yes, that's his real name, Farnklyn is his last name, a senior electronics engineer, completely contested the square wave theory.
Yeah, Franklin analyzed the tape and said it was, quote, almost certainly a fake, end quote, and found sounds, quote, typical of those made close to a microphone, including room reverberation.
Right. So he heard echoes that shouldn't be there if the mic was disconnected. He found wow and flutter, which suggests a poor quality sound source. And most damning of all, he claimed he found breathing.
Breathing, you say?
Yeah, a breathing rate of about one breath every 4 seconds. Franklin's conclusion was that the recorder was picking up audio from the room, possibly through a mic that hadn't been fully disabled or through some kind of secondary source.
Right, and then this fueled Tony Cornell's argument. Cornell was the heavy hitter skeptic of the SPR, and his stance was simple. If you can produce it normally, as Franklin suggested, then you can't claim it's paranormal. He argued that because the group refused certain controls, like infrared cameras, the evidential value of these effects was reduced to almost zero. So now you have a battle of some experts, which we've always seen.
Yes.
One side sees a data stream, the other side hears a guy breathing in a room. Basically, the hoax here is that someone is breathing into a disconnected mic. Somehow it's being picked up, but it's in the room. It's not being laid down directly to tape. It's not, as they say, direct induction or whatever. So, okay, does that, though, then negate any of this? Because the breathing was one every 4 seconds, one breath every... It's a very slow breathing rate.
Yeah. Also, why couldn't that come from the spirits? Like, even if it did sound kind of analog, they didn't hear it when they pressed record in the room. Nobody heard anything. until they
Yes.
played it back.
Well, there's some disembodied breathing going around this house here. It's
That's
very
true.
interesting.
That's true. I forgot about that.
Yes, that my mom is hearing, but not me.
Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows how these things work? But
Yeah.
what you're talking about is the tape then, having fallen victim to that magician's substitution idea, no matter how it was recorded, because there was no microphone. So somebody's swapping something else out, a piece of medium here.
Yeah.
So it's almost irrelevant whether you think it was analog or digital if you can't prove someone did not switch out the tape or did.
Or someone did switch the tape out. Yeah, either way, I guess. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's what I'm saying is that
Yeah.
some chicanery is going on here, that the chain of custody is broken.
This is Aikawa Higashi. Thank you for listening to Astonishing Legends. Let's get back to the show.
Before we move on here, and you touched on this a minute ago, I want to quickly talk about digital versus analog audio because I think it's relevant to the perception of this. Now, I've mentioned this on the show over the years as something I learned from my past life as a video and film editor. And the reason I became such a vinyl record nerd, analog audio creates the smooth sine waves. Digital audio cannot be analog. Instead, it creates staircases that approach the sine wave shape. It is and will always be a little jagged, and where the top corner of the stair step intersects what would be an analog sine wave, that is a sample point. So sample rates are related to this idea. CDs, a now mostly dead format, had a sample rate of 44,100 hertz. So there would be 44,100 samples or steps in a second. Digital audio tapes, or DATs, like Forrest mentioned a minute ago, another dead format, would have 48,000 hertz. So they were better than CDs. Now, you can always increase the sample rate of digital music so that there are more steps on that sampling staircase, getting closer and closer together, and it will start to look more and more like a sine wave curve and sound more like analog, but at the same time, it can never fully be that curve. It's mathematically impossible for the staircase to fully become a curve, no matter how close you build the stairs together. But it could appear as a curve to a human due to the limits of our ability to perceive the difference after a certain point. If you up that sample rate super high, 300,000 samples per second or something, we probably can't tell.
Yeah, it's a little like imagining a exactly smooth line and something, well, we see this now in early graphics, right? Jaggies, they call them. It's like
artifacts.
Yeah, that's how you have to see it. But if you get it really fine, then it disappears to the eye, but they're still there.
Right.
It's the difference between you drawing a line with a pencil or ink pen and in a computer doing it. It has to operate in blocks.
That's right.
I think it's like a Sierpinski triangle or funnel, in that the narrow part of the funnel mathematically gets very, very narrow. You could say infinitely, but it will never close off.
Right.
It's an interesting aspect of that. It'll never quite get there, but
yes.
But anyway, we're digressing here. So
Yes.
What we're talking about, though, is that how is this happening? We're talking about how is the phenomena presenting itself, and can people replicate this? And there are people who will say, well, there's no audible or discernible difference between, say, something like with a very high sample rate digital audio file or something that's an analog source, like a record recorded on analog tape as a master, and then in a studio and pressed to vinyl. And if you're an audiophile or just interested in music, it's an old argument now going on for decades when this technology emerged, because people were saying, well, what's the difference? It's like, the digital aspect of recording is pristine, but a lot of engineers will say, like, yeah, but it feels cold. So there's a subjective, emotional part of that where it's like, no, analog feels warmer. There's some texture to it. Yeah,
there are some super nerdy audiophiles that tell you that because that digital sample staircase will always be a staircase, it can never match the sine wave, the analog sine wave. And I know for a fact, I cannot put my finger on the difference, but I can also tell you, I have the double album set of In Rainbows by Radiohead. And there is a night and day difference between listening to that and listening to it off the CDs, which came with that box set. I have both. I can tell the difference.
Right. And so what we're talking about here, especially when you hear, I think, human voices, and also we respond very directly and emotionally to music. Right. There's a major difference, people will tell you, between hearing live music and hearing a great audio recording of music is
Right.
that you're feeling the
Exactly.
vibration being there in the performance
Like Marky
space.
Mark.
And
Yeah.
that has a lot to do with it. Plus, you're around other people. There's a lot to that. So what we're talking about here is the human experience about all this, and not the
Yes,
cold
yes.
vastness of digital audio recording, where what's the difference? Why is it important? Well, you could be pointing to, is there a lingering human or soul phone, emphasis on the soul part here,
Right.
that's persisting? But
Right.
here's the thing, Scott. So, okay, say if we agree with some of that, what the investigators were saying, that the wave was a square in shape as being a wave, then we're looking at digital audio being recorded onto the cassette deck with no microphone, right?
Right. So it doesn't really make it better whether they can agree it's analog or digital. It's still a cassette deck with no microphone, even though they're like, well, it's
Right.
vibrating through, it came through. It doesn't make sense. Anyway, coming back to this idea with this recording, the chirps themselves, the data bursts overlaid on the Rachmaninoff, they were undeniably strange. It was as if the spirit team was trying to send too much information at once and the recorder couldn't handle the bandwidth.
Would that be like trying to download a 4K movie over dial-up?
Yeah.
Remember that, what that was like. So your bandwidth, your pipe isn't big enough, but just the fact that they chose Rachmaninoff is a pretty cool idea to me. It feels like it's an aesthetic choice. So it wasn't just somebody saying testing 1, 2, 3 in a ghostly voice, although that would have been cool too.
Yeah, and Rachmaninoff, he wasn't that long ago. He died in 1940, so the early 40s, I think. So this is not it's not like Mozart or Beethoven.
Right.
Which does make you wonder whether or not some of these people, the spirit team, is using something from their era when they were alive. But this brings me to what I think is the most significant event for Professor Arthur Ellison, because while the tape was impressive, Ellison was an engineer and he still wanted to find, William James' proverbial white crow.
Well, speaking of white crows, there's a great clip I just saw, weirdly, of a white crow, which is not albino. It's what's called a leucistic bird, which is a condition by either partial or total loss of the pigmentation in the feathers, and they look white, but they, other than that, not the red eyes or anything else, they have the normal coloring. And this guy was caring for one, and he said, it has to be here. They don't survive out in the wild because the sun will eventually kill them. So getting back to...
Wait, we got to stop. We can't leave the obvious line behind.
What's that?
Not all crows are black.
Yeah, there you go.
There we go. You just disproved it right there. I think we need to put up a Wikipedia page.
They're not all crows are black.
That's the expression. If one is white.
And there's at least 2 different ways in which they are not black.
Albino
that's also
and
pointing to
leucistic or
leucistic,
leucistic or
so
leucistic, yes.
Yeah, it's different than albinism. So what you have is that the point that I always see is that it's possible.
Right.
Just because I've never seen a white crow. That's impossible. Okay.
I haven't.
So there you go. I haven't either.
I've seen white deer.
It's pretty rare, but they're out there. So that's the idea about the white crow and William James. It's possible.
Yes.
So in 1996, November, he got it. Ellison decided he wanted to test the light phenomenon they'd been experiencing because he'd been seeing spirit lights, which they were calling them, these balls of light that zipped around the room. But he was suspecting, okay, maybe these are just LEDs on a stick, some type of fiber optics. So for this session, a natural quartz crystal was brought in specifically for the experiment. This is a rock, a piece of quartz, a crystal, as they said. It's solid. They knew it was solid. They knew it had no batteries, and most importantly, they knew it hadn't been tampered with.
Yeah, so he puts this crystal on the table in the dark, and during the sitting, a spirit light, described as a small point of light, actually enters the crystal.
Ooh.
We're not talking about a reflection. Ellison described the crystal as being illuminated from within, permeating the structure with light.
Yes, and then it moves. It levitates. Now, I was just thinking, in the 90s, actually 80s to late 80s, what became popular, I'm sure you had one, and I love the callbacks to folks our age, but you remember you had a lot of cheesy lamps that were using fiber optics, right? So it would be colored.
Yes.
And they would twirl, and it was kind of a cool
Spencer
effect.
Gifts. I had them.
That's right, exactly. So,
but if you have a cat, you only get to keep it for about one day.
You should choose on them, right? And then
it just destroyed it. I had a cat. I bought one. I was so excited. I saved up from my first job. It's like $40, and the next day it looked like a beaker, like it had no hair anymore.
The cat It was also fascinating to the cat. It's kind of a,
the
it's kind
cat
of a neat
loved it.
effect.
It
Right.
was super into
The other one, you might see lamps that had the monofilament, and then they would drip oil.
Yes.
So the light would shine through that, but it would just recycle this dripped oil. Anyway, fun from the 90s.
Yes.
So what we're talking about here, though, is with the report, which focuses on the result here, Monty Keene vividly describes watching it lift off the table and then float over to a Pyrex bowl that was sitting in the center of the room. And then it gently lands in the base of this bowl.
The crystal does, right. So now at this point, Ellison's impressed, but he's still a scientist. He wants to verify the data. So the spirit team tells him to reach into the bowl and pick up the crystal. He does. He feels it. It's a cold, hard stone, but he describes it as vibrating. He could feel it vibrating. So then he puts it back.
Right. And this is where the physics breaks down. The team tells him to try again.
Ellison looks into the bowl. He can see the crystal. It's still glowing. It's right there. He reaches in to grab it, and his fingers go right through it.
So here he's looking right at it, but there's nothing to touch. Now, the Scole report describes it as a three-dimensional image of a glowing crystal, which is found to be insubstantial when seized.
Yes, that's very scientific. Yeah.
Right. So basically, you're seeing a hologram, right?
Right.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Ellison actually put his head right over the bowl to make sure no one else's hand was in the way. And he could see this crystal, but he could not feel it.
Right. So then the spirit team, tells him to try a third time. He reaches in, and suddenly it's back. It's solid again. He can pick it up. Right. The physical matter had apparently returned.
So the spirit team's explanation for this was pretty fascinating. They claim they had dematerialized the physical matter of the rock, but left the essence or the form visible. And they said it was a demonstration of what happens at death. The physical body goes, but the essential form remains. And is that what we're looking at when we see ghosts?
Right. So this sounds a little bit like Rupert Sheldrake's morphic resonance, which we're going to talk about in part 3 here. But Sheldrake describes morphic fields as invisible, intangible structures that impose form on matter. It's like the architectural blueprint that exists even if you take away the bricks.
Yes, the wonderful Dr. Rupert Sheldrake, whose whole life is a sham and pseudoscience if you look at his wiki page. But in any case, it's just like morphic fields. That's impossible. I can't see it. You cannot prove it to me. So that's the idea, is that if you remove the atoms, the bricks, the field, or this essence might still be there. So it's like the ghost, the whiff of it is still holding there. It's still holding that shape. But for Ellison, in that moment, it was just impossible. He watched a solid object become a ghost and then turn back into a rock. And as an electrical engineer and a scientific mind, he could not explain this.
Right. And this is Arthur Ellison, the skeptic, the man who debunked levitation for a living, more or less. And here he is sticking his hand into a glowing rock that shouldn't be glowing and finding nothing is there. And he said in some footage in the documentary on the Scole Experiment, this is against all the laws of nature. We know how the world behaves, and it doesn't behave like that. So the Scole phenomena, they weren't just tricks. They were demonstrations of a physics we don't understand yet. All right, so I have to stop and interrupt here for a minute. And we're just going to do a little sidetrack. As we said on the show before, when we record, we work off of an outline interspersed with some scripted stuff that we paraphrase, and our notes and improvisation. Now, we might script something here and there to make sure we don't leave details out. So this interruption tonight that I am starting right now in the story is not live, and we're not pretending that it is, because that would be staged, but it should go at this exact moment in the story of the Scole Experiment, because something really bizarre happened in my house while I was working on this exact section of our outline for part 2 less than 24 hours ago.
Oh, did it now?
Yes, as you know.
It did, because you showed me video with it.
Yeah.
And but like I said, you can't like I'm eating dinner or whatever. It's like, oh, that's interesting. I'll look at this later. And then
I couldn't wrap my head around it.
Well, folks, keep this in mind. It's what Scott and I, and I'm sure many of you have expressed, is that there's a major difference between hearing about something or even seeing something and being there to experience it yourself. There's a shift in just, how you feel about it. And intellectually, but also emotionally and
Yeah.
physically. And
Yeah.
so, yes. So, all right, what happened?
Yeah, so we're recording this right now as we're speaking into the microphones. We're recording this on February 10th, 2026 in the evening. It's about 10 till 10 here for my time on the East Coast. Last night, while I was researching this exact section, my wife, Emily, was fixing some food in the kitchen. And we live in a townhome. First floor is an open floor plan, I think early 2000s. And the kitchen and living room are really one kind of open room with an unused hip wall or bar separating them. And so she's finishing fixing something for me and our son to eat, and she turned on the disposal for a minute as she was rinsing something off, and there was this incredibly loud sound.
You
Like
heard
something
it, right?
was down in there. Yeah, it was super, super loud. It was
Right.
so disconcerting. My son and I were both like, turn it off, turn it off. There must be a fork or something down in the disposal.
Something is down there, and it makes an awful sound, and it's alarming.
Yeah.
And that point is, I'm going to make a point about that point later.
Okay.
'Cause it's
So
important.
yeah. So the thing here is this is a violent mechanical grinding sound. Emily turns it off. She reaches down in the sink. I'm like, make sure it's off, make sure it's off. And
Right.
she found something which she pulled out, which I have shown to you already. There will be pictures of it posted with this episode.
Oh.
Go to our episode page. We'll get it up onto social media as well when this comes out.
Yeah, so I saw the pictures last night, but for folks who are only listening to this, the way to describe it, it's slightly smaller than a ping pong ball, I would say.
Yeah.
But it looks like a large piece of glass, solid,
yes.
broken glass, or just with something it makes sense that it might be something that's gone through a disposal or some kind of chipping process, right? And that it's,
Right.
it's not exactly round. It's jagged, but not very sharp. It's like it's been beaten up a bit. It's still very clear all the way through. It's not a smooth surface. It's jagged, but there are the planar flat sides of it do look smooth. You don't see any of that scalloping that you might with like a piece of obsidian.
Yeah, if you want to see it, it's up on the website, but it's not from a drinking glass. It's thick, it's raw, it has no finished edges. It looks like a piece that would have been a part of something larger that maybe completely exploded or disintegrated. But here's the thing. Nobody in my house, and my whole family was there, which is just 3 people, but we were all in the room when this happened. Nobody has broken anything like this that we can remember in months, if not longer. We haven't lost a vase. We haven't lost a bottle. This thing just kind of arrived in the disposal. While I was working on this particular section of tonight's outline about the crystal appearing and disappearing and levitating and being touchable and then not being able to be picked up for this section that Forrest and I agreed that I would do the research on. So, yeah.
Yes, your crystal method. Your, the dark crystal here. Well, to me, it looks like the closest thing would be for a knob, a chunk of glass that thick would be decorative, right? So you'd have a glass ball, like a giant marble of some kind.
Yeah.
And the only thing that would be close is maybe the glass stopper from a bottle. But it would have some angular bits of it, right? It would be, if it was a ball, it would have the stopper portion of that.
It's nothing like that.
Yeah, it's nothing like that. So, and nothing in your house is broken that would account for this, right?
Yeah, no, nothing in this house has broken for a while. But even if it did, it wouldn't account for the size of this piece of glass. And like I said, it has no finished edges. You don't look at it and think, oh yeah, I can see how this would be part of a beer mug or something. Which, by the way, we don't have any. So
no, but like I said, it's anything like a glass. It's too thick for that. It would have to be something decorative. You know what I'm saying, or just that fell in. So let's look at this either way. One is that it's a mundane explanation. Something fell in the sink, or your son broke something and it fell in there, and he's just kind of fibbing about it because he didn't want to get in trouble.
Yeah.
But he swears he didn't drop anything down.
He would
there.
also have to disappear whatever the thing was and clean it up perfectly.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing anywhere.
Oh.
There's no broken glass anywhere in the kitchen, on the floor, in the house, in the trash, and we're not missing anything.
Right.
So if he was doing that, and he's a fairly honest kid, I'll add, he would have really had to clean it up in a way that I'm not convinced at 16 he's capable of.
No, he's very clever. He is very clever. So don't put it past him. And I thought it's funny, like this old producer boss friend of mine, she had a cat that loved to wander around the house with the marble in its mouth and then drop it into things like like a vase, a bowl, But your cat wouldn't have done that. I don't think it wouldn't have dropped
I know. I
anything.
wouldn't say he does walk around the house with his toys and stuff, but
Yeah.
never a large piece of broken glass, and he never has put anything in the sink. And we would have heard it when he did it, because the only time he's down there is when we're there.
Okay. So
when we're not home, he's locked up in the upstairs portion of our home. So
okay, let's accept or entertain the idea that it's possibly some genuine apportation, but not jumping to any kind of conclusions here. This does sound like a Scole signature. And I said this before we even started thinking about this analytically, that if it was an apportation by some force, intelligent force that is from beyond, then it put it in a place where it made a dramatic impact in its announcement or arrival. And it's
Right.
someplace that you would find it rather quickly, because you're
Yeah.
using the sink. It's not like it was in a bowl high up on a shelf. It's like you find next Thanksgiving because you're making mashed potatoes.
yeah,
It put it somewhere you would find it rather quickly. And also its announcement or arrival was heralded with a disconcerting sound. It was a very dramatic presentation, you could say.
it was loud.
Yeah, it's loud.
Yeah.
So then you're having, a piece of raw material of some kind, like a piece of quartz. You're also having there's some context in the synchronicity of what you're studying now and talking about. And then it's making an announcement. So it's like you are now a participant, perhaps, in this experiment.
Yeah.
Some spooky action at a distance, some hitchhiker phenomenon going on here. You're not just telling a story. It's somehow you're connected. You are part of the story. You are connected.
Yeah, dude, I don't need
Yes,
that.
you do.
Here's the thing.
Yes, you do need it.
I'd probably be a lot more freaked out, actually, if I felt like there was an evil component to the story. But most of it is very kind seeming. The ending of it all is a bit weird, but you know what I mean? I can't remember if I told you this. The thing is that early in the afternoon yesterday, I was thinking about how most of the original participants in the experiment have now passed.
Mm-hmm.
And I was wondering if we should try to reach out to them in some kind of way. But frankly, looking at this jagged piece of glass, I'm not sure if this message, if it is a message, is hello or stop.
Well, look, let's look at it this way. I guess you could look at it this way. I probably, as a spirit, maybe not put something there. But like I said, if that just popped up on the counter, you may have gone a couple of days like, hey, who put this there? Where is this yours? Like, no, I didn't,
Yeah.
Well, I don't remember this showing up. And so, like I said, it was a very dramatic place and an unusual place to signify some kind of message of hello. Didn't hurt anybody. And it wasn't like a rock, which may have damaged your sync erator system.
Yeah.
So I think perhaps it's a hello. Let's hope it's that, because we have one more to go here. One more part.
I can't even process it. My family's been talking about it all day today.
Really?
We don't know what to think. And by now, one of us would have remembered something being forgotten. We're still going through it. Frankly, it's mind-blowing. I don't know what to do with it emotionally or how to convey that. It's not paranormal apathy. It's just I'm still processing it.
There's no explanation for that. So what do you do with that? Well, you have to move on.
Yeah.
But it's also like like the anecdote I had from a long time ago about talking about our dearly departed friend Paul, who had passed, and talking about working together. And again, that's the context. Working is like, we had such great times, and Paul would have loved to have been at this dinner. And that's when the top of the Suntory whiskey bottle, the glass stopper, it was pushed down like at least halfway, because I was the one who pushed it in.
Yeah.
And it popped out, hit the table, rolled off the table. And so what do you do with that? And so, his widow said like, oh, there's Paul. He's with us. He's wanting a drink. It's like, it's exactly what he would say. And so our other friend, David, he just picks it up off the floor. He puts it back in, and then we just move on because like, okay, that was odd, but it didn't pop out of the bottle and levitate around our heads. Right. So it's not that level. It was just like, that was very strange. And it has some context and meaning. Anyway. Yeah. Okay, so in any case, I think this may be an ongoing thing, and we should take this conversation over to Patreon and do it on video, because we've not had any kind of offerings over there for folks, and I'd love to be able to have something new. So might be kind of cool, and also there's video.
Yeah, I would be down with that.
All right.
Hi, I'm Simon, and you're listening to Astonishing Legends with Scott Philbrook and Forrest Burgess. Now, back to the show.
Well, back to the Receptor, the device we teased at the top of the show. Now we've talked about the film, we've talked about the tapes, but in the minds of the Scole group, And the entities they're working with, those were just stepping stones.
Exactly. So you have a tape recording, and no matter how impressive it is, it's still a passive piece of data, you could say, or evidence.
Yes.
So you ask
Yes.
for a sign, and then you wait, and then you play it back later. It's kind of asynchronous. It's kind of like leaving a voicemail. But the team on the other side, these spirit scientists, as they call themselves, they wanted a telephone. Just like in the Twilight Zone in a few episodes. They wanted
That's
real-time two-way communication. The other one that we don't talk about as far as Twilight Zones is the grandmother who passes, and she leaves her
Yes.
grandson a toy telephone, and they're
Yes,
talking
yes,
a
yes.
lot. And that one
Yes,
gets a
I
little
love that
dark because grandma misses her grandson.
Well, there's another motivation here for the telephone, the skeptics, specifically the SPR. They were still hung up on the mediums involved,
Yeah.
Diana and Alan
Right.
Bennett. So remember, Diana was the trance medium, Alan was the physical medium. So even with the boxes, even with the controls and the experiment and the investigation, there's all this nagging doubt. Is
Right.
the medium doing it? Is this ventriloquism? Is this subconscious projection?
Well, even that would be quite a feat. Just projecting.
It still would be amazing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
something projected
exactly.
into the
Yeah.
right, as we talked about the Watsika Wonder, if it's ESP being projected, this data, like that's pretty amazing in itself.
Yeah,
But what
yeah.
we're talking about here is the human variable. And as long as the voice is coming out of a person's mouth, even if that person is in a deep trance, you can argue that it's biological to a large degree. To actually prove the afterlife exists to a scientist, you have to take the biology out of the loop.
Yeah, you had to build a machine, and that's exactly what the entities proposed. In late 1996, via those film strips we mentioned earlier, they delivered a set of blueprints.
You know, if you show the schematic that appeared on the film to a modern electrical engineer, they're going to give you a crazy look.
Yeah, because it's bafflingly simple,
Right.
which all good solutions are, right? But we should probably explain what that piece of crystal is actually doing. Why germanium? Why not copper or steel?
That's a good question. And the answer is because germanium is a semiconductor and a rectifier. And in the early days of radio, before we had vacuum tubes or transistors, germanium was the magic ingredient in what they called a crystal set.
Right, a crystal radio. No batteries, no power source, just pulled energy right out of the air.
Yeah, exactly. So, but here's a problem with that pulling energy out of the air. Radio waves, and arguably whatever spirit energy is, travel as alternating current. You heard of the phrase, the letters AC? Yeah, as opposed
Yes.
to DC, which is direct current.
Yes.
AC wiggles back and forth, positive and negative, thousands of times per second. And if you fed that raw, wiggly signal directly into a speaker or a headphone, you really wouldn't hear anything because the diaphragm would just vibrate so fast it would cancel itself out. So you'd get silence or probably just a hum.
Yeah. So you need a gatekeeper. You need something to stop the electricity from flowing backward. Now, normally, you'd need to turn that two-way AC traffic into a one-way DC pulse. And that's what rectifying means. It's a fancy word for like a kind of a turnstile.
Yeah, so think of the germanium crystal as a one-way turnstile at a subway station. The energy wave hits it, and then the positive part of the wave pushes through the turnstile. It does a click, and then it goes to the headphones. But when the wave swings back the other way, and this would be the negative part, then the turnstile locks up, and it blocks it, and it chops off half the wave. It strips away the carrier noise and leaves only the signal pulses. And those pulses are what push the speaker cone to make that sound.
Right. So in the context of the Scole experiment, their germanium is not just a crystal, it's a translator. The spirit team was blasting raw energy into the room, which was experienced as light or vibration, but the germanium theoretically rectified it. It chopped that raw energy into linear audible pulses that people's ears could hear as a voice.
Yeah, it turned energy into speech.
Right. And so there's a major caveat here, though. This whole rectifier theory, the idea that it was turning AC into DC, was what Professor Arthur Ellison thought was happening. To him, it looked like a diode. It made perfect engineering sense.
Right, but then the spirit team actually shuts him down on this. In the Scole report, there's a specific exchange where the entity known as Joseph tells Ellison point blank, do not think of this as a rectifier.
Which is wild. And so you have a spirit telling an electrical engineer that his physics are wrong. They insisted it wasn't chopping the wave like a radio crystal. Instead, they described the germanium as a focal point or a grounding anchor that allowed their energy to interface with our dimension, for lack of a better word.
Which is pretty fascinating. And then I think about, like, we're talking about EVPs here, and the old analog way of getting them is that you get a better result. You don't really have to have it, but to get a better result, people would often have like a tape recorder, analog, cassette recorder, and then play in the background some kind of white noise. Fan noise, or it was on one file you could download Portuguese crowd noise played backwards, some kind of murmur, some kind of babbling, running water. You need that medium, that sound to work with, to manipulate into speech. So you're talking about the spirit team here, and even though they gave us the blueprints, they're essentially saying here, you can build it, but you're not going to understand how it works yet.
Right. So you have the germanium in there. It's mounted on a copper strip. You have 2 coils of wire, high resistance. And then you have a contact screw filed to a point pressing down on the germanium.
Remember, it looks like what they called the cat's whisker detector from the 1920s. The kind of things kids use to pick up AM radio stations. And as I was mentioning in part 1, we talk about Radio Shack. You could buy, they had these fun experiment kits for kids, and one of them was a crystal radio.
Yeah, and I remember those. I never got to build one of those. I did have the 50-in-1 set, which was from Radio Shack.
Yes.
Oh, I love that. And it had like little radio circuits in it, but you could do other things with it. It was very cool. But a crystal radio needs an antenna to catch the waves. It needs a ground to complete the circuit, and it needs a tuner, like a capacitor, to set the frequency. This device had none of that. It's a closed loop. It's just basically a rock, a screw, and some wire in a plastic box.
And also it has no battery. Think about that.
Right. No power source in the receptor itself. It had an output jack that went to a standard audio amplifier just to make the signal audible. But the device itself generated no current. It shouldn't have been able to pick up anything.
Scientifically, as we were saying earlier, it's a brick. It's a paperweight. It's an inert hunk of junk.
Yeah, it's a dead circuit. So if you plug that into an amp, you should get silence. Maybe a little hum if your shielding's bad, but you certainly wouldn't get a voice. And yet the spirit team was adamant. They said, build this. This is the bridge. So Robin Foy builds it. He follows the instructions to the letter. January 21st, 1997. The SPR investigators are present. The room is sealed. They hook the box up to the amp, and at first, silence.
Yeah.
Just the hiss of the amp, the noise floor, they call that. The group is sitting there in the dark, and for a moment, it feels like a failure. They built this magic box, or they thought it was magic, and it's doing absolutely nothing.
But then the entities, speaking through the medium at first, which is more human flesh and bone.
The person we're trying to retire with this thing.
Right. They told Robin to adjust the pressure on the screw to tune it physically. Again, like a crystal set.
Yeah, which is interesting. That implies the connection's not digital, it's mechanical, and it's about finding a resonant frequency in the material itself. It's almost like tuning a violin string, but in this case, the string is a piece of semi-metal.
So Robin reaches out in the dark, and then he finds that screw, and then he tweaks it a little.
And suddenly the hiss changes. It starts to pulse. It sounds like a heartbeat, a rhythmic thump, thump, thump over the speakers.
Right, and this would be what's called the carrier wave, that the energy to carry that signal.
And then cutting through that wave, a voice emerges. And we need to describe this voice because it didn't sound like the transpersonalities. It didn't sound like Patrick the Irishman or Manu the guy.
Manu. Okay.
Manu.
So to me, also think about this in the world of telephony. Remember, you would see this on the old movies. And like in the military movies where they have the portable radio and they have to crank it.
Yes.
And what you're doing is that you're generating the electricity to move that
like
voice.
Radar and MASH.
Yeah, that's right. You're opening up a channel here. You're cranking it doesn't take a lot. I think like your old rotary telephones, I think it's only about like 6 volts.
Yeah.
But you'd see also.
I have an emergency radio. Yeah. Same thing. It still has one of those cranks.
There you go. Yeah. So you need, but you need that electricity. The electrons there to be the carrier signal or to push that telephony along the phone lines.
Right.
You need that a bit of to push it along. So that's what I think of like a carrier wave or a carrier signal is you have a baseline there or a medium for that to travel along. So getting back to Patrick the Irishman or the defrocked priest or Manu the guide, This is not like that. The report describes it as sounding robotic. It's kind of monotone, kind of a metallic sound, like a Dalek, perhaps. Like, yeah, just exactly what you pictured in your mind. Or some kind of transmission from deep space. It didn't have breadth or breath to it. It didn't have any inflection. And for those who didn't grow up watching Doctor Who, a Dalek is basically a giant angry pepper pot made of metal. It looks like to me, it looks like, if you've been by an old lumber mill and where they dry out the lumber, it's like a salt shaker. Yeah. Same with the rivets and all that. Yeah.
But the voice, that's the key. It's staccato, electronic. It has no modulation, no emotion. It's just raw metallic command. And that's exactly how witnesses describe the voice coming out of the germanium receptor.
Right. And the first voice they heard coming out of it said, "Hello. Hello, can you hear me? Hello, can you hear me?" And then there was a pause and it said, "I shall continue this transmission." So just very kind of flat, robotic a little bit. So
that's the moment. That is the Mr. Watson come here moment of the paranormal. You have a conversation happening between a group of living humans and a disembodied consciousness mediated not by a larynx, but by a piece of germanium. At this point, the group is completely enthralled. They're leaning in to hear what is coming out of their germanium receptor. And if I'm not mistaken, I think there was an idea that this might have actually been, or at least pretending to be, Thomas Edison.
Exactly. It reminds me a little of a Steve Huff Spirit Box. Remember that the guitar amp?
Oh yeah, totally.
Yeah, which gives a really creepy, cool effect. But
yes,
but there's also he'll employ crystals and wiring on that too, if you believe any of that at all. But think about this: the implications are staggering because if you're talking through a machine, you're not really a ghost anymore, are you? You're kind of an operator. It shifts the entire paradigm. And perhaps we stop thinking about spirits as these kind of misty, miasma, ethereal things that are kind of just prone to haunting attics and cellars and basements.
Yeah.
We start thinking of them as technicians who are dealing with physics we don't understand. Now, this points out just quickly here a fascinating aspect of it because we tend to, I think, as living beings, think of people or ghosts or spirits, if at all, as something else other than what they were in life. And imagine then an engineer, a scientist passing on that consciousness, that personality, that spirit. Would they not still be some kind of person interested in science?
Right.
Right. So now they're like, no, you just got the chains and the boxes and the rattling and the wailing. No, it's
your germanium is hooked up incorrectly.
Right.
Tighten the screw.
Yeah, right. It was the voice, and that's how we think of it, of course.
Look, I'm trying to help you out here. You want this to work? Follow my instructions.
Well, here's the thing. And then would they have access to some kind of more advanced knowledge?
Yeah.
Because here, the entities actually explained how it worked. They said the germanium acted as a grounding point for their energy. You're not thinking about it the right way. That's also what we've been talking about, too, is that we are not thinking outside of our own little boxes here.
Right.
They weren't creating sound waves. They were creating electrical impulses directly in the semiconductor.
It's literally the ghost in the machine.
Yeah,
They're hacking the circuit.
Yeah.
Right. And and this is where Arthur Ellison, the SPR specifically, he started to lose his footing because he could explain away a medium doing a character voice. He could explain away a blurry photo, but he couldn't explain a circuit that worked without power. And he couldn't explain the dialogue. The spirit scientists who called themselves the team started discussing the experiment with the investigators. The investigators asked for feedback. They asked for adjustments. You move the coil, change the resistance. The vibration is too low. And that's something that comes up, the vibration over time in everything that has to do with the paranormal, honestly.
Well, all of life and existence, right? We've been hearing that. We hear that more and more, which is actually an ancient idea and concept, but we're hearing about more and more. Everything works on vibration. And the first time I started thinking about that critically was Brian Greene's explanation of string theory. And that it's like, imagine a line or a string and like a violin string, and that with vibration produces a lovely sound, or can.
Right.
So, and when they align, when everything aligns, you get your desired effect or your communication here. So what we're talking about here, this is also the fascinating aspect of it, not just that it is working, but it's a collaborative project or effort. It's a joint venture between living and theoretically those that have died. Or in this case, there's no such thing as death. They've just moved on to another state of existence. And then, of course, the entities are also impatient. Boy, where have you heard that before, where they get frustrated with us living idiots? They weren't there really to give some kind of comfort about what happened to your past pet. They're there to work. And they would get annoyed if the group wasn't following instructions fast enough. But I also understand that. It's like, look, you have to understand this is pretty mind-blowing stuff for these people. It's kind of hard to, you know, it's not. But I also understand it's like, look, we don't have enough time. It's like, I thought it was infinite time on the other side. Well, that's true. But you need to snap to it and start taking us seriously. It's kind of like working with a demanding department from IT for another dimension. Did you try turning the screw? Is the thing plugged in? Did you check that? Well, no, it doesn't have to be.
Yeah.
Like,
did you cycle the power?
Did you turn the other screw?
Cycle the power?
Move.
It doesn't have power.
Yeah.
How can we cycle the power if it doesn't have power?
Remember Jimmy Fallon, like, move. Yeah, get up, just move. Yeah.
I think I've said this on the show before. The problem is between the keyboard and the chair.
Yes, and often it was.
But this collaboration is exactly what Thomas Edison predicted.
Right.
He believed that if we ever contacted the dead, it wouldn't be through mediums. He thought it would be through a sensitive electrical apparatus. He actually said, quote, "I am inclined to believe that our personality hereafter will be able to affect matter. If this reasoning be correct, then if we can evolve an instrument so delicate as to be affected or moved or manipulated by our personality as it survives in the next life, such an instrument, when made available, ought to record something."
Yeah, what a great statement. And we've mentioned that before in previous episodes because, he was no slouch.
Yeah.
Odd guy, but no slouch. And
a little bit of a patent thief.
Well, certainly. But you got to overlook that. Come on, it's business, right?
I think I long for the world we might have had Tesla won out that competition.
Well, Tesla's a whole other 3-part series.
Yes,
it's just the groundbreaking ideas and people doing awful things. But here we are, 70 years later after Edison died, and a group in Norfolk seems to have built his machine or something with the same spirit.
But here's the rub. If you open that door, if you build a bridge that anyone can cross, as we said for years on the show, you don't always get to choose who does come across that bridge.
Yeah, that's another, now it's more supernatural, I guess, or the scary elements, that's right. So if you think the germanium receptor was a triumph, it was the proof the skeptics wanted, right? But it's also marked a turning point because once that signal was clear, the messages started to change. And they stopped being about love and light and started to get a little strange.
Yeah, so the faces on the video screens started changing. The voices changed. And suddenly the Scole group wasn't just talking to what they perceived as people long since gone. They were talking to something else entirely. By 1997, the Scole group had established a pattern. Mm-hmm. They had the seller, they had the team, they had the protocols, but skeptics and even the SPR investigators to some degree had one lingering doubt. It's about what you might call the home field advantage.
Okay, yeah, because no matter how much you strip search a medium or how many times you expect those floorboards, there's always that same nagging thought. This is their house. They own this place. Maybe there's a trap door that Monty Keene missed. Maybe there's a hidden projector in the ceiling that Arthur Ellison didn't notice. Maybe the dampness of the cellar is conducting electricity in a way we just don't understand.
Right. It's the Houdini argument. If you control the venue, you control the illusion. So the entities, the spirit team, decided to take the show on the road. In the summer of 1997, they accepted an invitation from a man named Dr. Hans Scher.
Yeah, Scher. Yeah, he wasn't a spiritualist. He was a Swiss lawyer. He's a corporate guy. But he was also a high-level investigator who wanted to see if the phenomena could survive a change in latitude, you could say.
Right. So, and we alluded to this a little earlier, but we're going to get into more detail about this now. They packed up their bags, Robin, Sandra, Alan, and Diana. They leave the damp, cold environment of Norfolk and fly to a private villa in Ibiza, Spain.
Ooh, is that your Catalan pronunciation?
That is my Catalan pronunciation.
Oh,
Sorry,
well, now it turned French. Yeah.
Adam Sandler, France.
No.
Ibiza. So they're in Ibiza.
Okay, well, it's a nice place to.
Never been there.
Yeah, but it's a if you're gonna go,
I didn't get invited.
yeah, they didn't.
They don't allow nerds. Well, they did in this case, I guess. But,
no, but they went somewhere nice, which is
Yes.
funny in a way. So
Yeah.
there's worse places to work. Anyway, picture the scene here. We aren't in a dark Victorian cellar anymore. It's a warm Mediterranean villa. It's dry. It's open. There are tiled floors and stucco walls, as you would imagine, but none of the EDM partiers.
Yeah. Well, at least in this case.
Right.
But crucially, though, the whole point of this, it's not their house.
Well, yeah.
They're guests. They have no time to rig anything. They don't have access to the wiring. They're operating in a sterile environment provided by a third party. So if this is a trick, it's a trick that fits in a carry-on bag. They hold their sittings in the living room of the villa. They use a simple table provided by Dr. Scher. And immediately, the phenomena starts up. The lights appear. The voices come through. But in Ibiza, the manifestations seem energized.
Well, there you go, because of nicer weather.
Yeah.
They're
like, this is cool.
It's the party atmosphere. But it could be other things too. Lack of psychic baggage.
Yeah.
The residue, you could say. And is it connected to the people as well? Have they opened up a channel that you can take with you?
Right.
Because here the phenomenon didn't just stay in the seance room. In Ibiza, the strangeness expanded to the whole property. So we're not just talking about wraps on the table here. There's a famous account regarding the villa's swimming pool, which had electrical underwater lights, which are hardwired to the property, and then those began to behave intelligently. So they're all going for a swim. Isn't that nice?
Well, witnesses described those lights as switching on and off, but not just flickering randomly. They were pulsing in perfect time to the music the group was playing, which is no big deal now. But back then, apparently it was. I mean, you can get even a light bulb for your lamp that'll do that now. But this was 1997.
Well, yes, but Radio Shack did have those disco light things that responded to the beat of the music. Remember that? They were colorful.
I love those things.
I know. The Radio Shack was wonderful. It's too bad people stopped building their own electronics.
Yes.
So here, though, it's like there's a change of setting. We've talked about this with the Philip experiment, going back to that, and that you can actually kick up the energy too, about being lively and fun. And I guess that party atmosphere, we have we have underwater lights that are acting as disco lights now. So you could say, okay, the team here, well, I guess the spirit team, somehow gained control of the villa's electrical system. This wasn't a trick device hidden in someone's pocket. This was the house itself responding to the circle.
Yeah, and Dr. Scher was stunned. He wrote a report stating that the change in location had zero negative effect on the phenomenon. In fact, it seemed to prove that the battery, in quotes, wasn't the house. It was the circle themselves, the four people who started the experiment in the first place.
Yeah, well, again, we said at the part one, we all know we as humans generate electricity, right? Electrical energy. This engine, though, of these four people, and I think because they've also worked for so long together, they're part of this engine, this power plant here. They were like a dynamo, and the location was just the setting. It's just a stage for them to operate on.
So they have conquered the home field argument in Spain. The group returned to England. They had proven they could travel, and the events would go with them. But the spirit scientists were interested in technology. So now it's time to move on to the next step of this. We're back in Norfolk. It's late 1997. The Germanium receptor has proven audio contact is possible, but now the team wants to be seen. It's the next step, like to go from the photos, the wrapping to like actual visual representation.
Yeah.
So they initiated a new protocol called Project Alice.
Right. This part was also overseen by Dr. Hans Scher, the Swiss investigator we met in Ibiza. But now he's in Scole, and he has a very specific optical trap he set up.
That's right. This is a feedback loop. Now, anyone who's ever been in a Zoom meeting knows what this looks like. You accidentally share your screen while looking at your own video, and suddenly you get that tunnel effect.
Yeah, and the image repeats itself into infinity. You can also do it standing between two mirrors.
That's right.
The infinity here thing was very important to me. Think about that.
Yes. Yeah.
Infinite.
So this is exactly what the spirits or the spirit team wanted. They didn't use a webcam. They went analog and they used mirrors.
Right. So you have that bouncing back and forth of light ad
Yes.
infinitum. So, and then specifically here, you could call this a double psychomantium, meaning that Cher set up two mirrors angled to reflect each other, and this creates an infinite tunnel of reflection. So this is what I mentioned before. It's like you stand between two mirrors, you look either way, and there's the light's bouncing back and forth. But at some point, the light dissipates.
Right. But in this case, they're at a little bit of an angle because
Right.
the camera is pointing, the lens is pointing at one of the mirrors, which is then reflected at an angle back to the other mirror, which is then peering back into the viewfinder of the camera.
Yes, right. So just like scrying in a black mirror, perhaps, with asphaltum, the idea here was that the spirits would manifest in that optical chaos, that zone of infinity, and they called it
Yes.
an interdimensional doorway.
So Cher checks everything. He treats the setup like a crime scene. He checked the angles. He checked for hidden projectors. He found nothing. It was a closed optical circuit.
Right. So then they turn on the camera, and in that tunnel of mirrors, that's where things started to form. And at first, the witnesses described bubble-like images, they would say, like glowing green globules floating in that reflection.
Right, which looked like old-timey pictures of ectoplasm forming in real time. But then amidst the swirling luminosity, faces began to resolve. And these weren't vague shapes. These were high-contrast, distinct portraits, and they were moving. They were dynamic.
Yeah, a face would start to form, then turn to look at the lens, which was disconcerting, and then
Yeah.
dissolve back into the void. It's a little bit. Remember I showed you some pictures of people scrying with liquid on the
Yes.
surface, and as
Yeah.
it swirls, it starts to form, and you can see faces.
Yes.
It's a like a visual component of that.
So this blew the investigators away. To fake this in a mirror reflection, you would need a hidden projector or a Pepper's Ghost setup, which we've talked about on the show before. But Cher was familiar with that, and he'd already ruled that out as what was going on.
Yeah, like it was the Haunted Mansion at Disney. Remember the
Yeah.
that's what we were talking about. That's the
Genius, that
Pepper's
thing is
Ghost.
genius.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's simple, but it's effective. And but
Right.
here the images were stunning because at first they looked like people. There were men in glasses, women in period hats. They looked like what you would imagine the dead to look like. And so it's a bit comforting in a weird way, kind of that grandma is okay. And that fits the spiritualist narrative that you are passed on, and you look exactly like when you passed.
Yeah, and this is when a documentary filmmaker got involved, a guy named Dan Drayson, and we were referring to his documentary as one of our sources for all of these episodes on this. He arrived to film these results, and he was pretty skeptical of the like boxes of tricks, but he even had to admit that the footage, which we have linked to in the show notes, was super compelling.
Yeah, but as the video experiments continued into 1998, the imagery starts to shift. The faces became less recognizable. They stopped looking like portraits of past loved ones and started looking like, well, like entities.
And this brings us to the edge of the cliff because the Scole Experiment started as a way to prove life after death. But by 1998, with the Germanium Receptor speaking in a robotic voice and the video screen showing faces that didn't look human, the group had to ask a terrifying question.
We open the door, but who or what is walking through it?
So let's take stock. It's 1997 going into 98. The Society for Psychical Research has spent 2 years tearing the Scole cellar apart. They've strip searched the mediums, as it were. Not really, but
yeah.
They brought in their own boxes. They even brought in their own film.
Right, and then every time they set a trap, the entities walked right through it. Literally.
Like Michael Jordan leaping into the air from the
right.
foul line and sinking a dunk. So good at the game, it's like you got to change the rules to make it fair for everyone else. We have the handshake with Monty Keene. We have the Impossible film with the Germanium blueprints. We have the Ruth film with the Kodachrome layers. We have the Ibiza trip, which proved the magic wasn't just in the street farmhouse. It was the group of people themselves.
Yeah, and by any reasonable metric, you could say the Scole group had won. They were successful. They had done what they had set out to do. They'd done what no one else had done in the 20th century. They now provided repeatable physical evidence of an external intelligence, at least.
Right. And Arthur Ellison, the hard-nosed skeptic, was writing papers saying that our understanding of physics was broken. Monty Keene was preparing a report that he hoped would change the world. They were high on success. But here's the thing about success in the paranormal. When you open a door that wide, you don't just get a breeze, you get a draft.
So as the experiments moved into 1998, that's when the tone began to shift. Tone shift. We mentioned these spirit scientists, the team. They were efficient. They were technical. But they were also disconnected in a way. You know, they're not Aunt Mildred coming through to say she's happy in the Summerland and the great hereafter.
Yes.
These guys were technicians. And as the group moved into the video experiments, the instrumental transcommunication, the ITC part of this, the images they were getting started to reflect that disconnection.
And we talked about the faces in the static. At first, they were human. They looked like sketches of people. But then one night, they got an image that didn't look like a person at all.
Yes, this image came to be known as Blue, as the name of the being in it.
The group was running a video feedback loop. They were recording frame by frame, and when they paused the tape, there was a face staring back at them.
Yes, now picture this. This image, it's bald. It had a small pointed chin, had large, dark, slanted almond-shaped eyes. It didn't look like a Victorian spirit. In fact, it didn't look like a human being.
It looked like a gray.
Right. And when the group asked who this was, the response wasn't, oh, just a spirit. The entities explicitly referred to time travelers from our future and interdimensional friends using the bridge. And this is where I first saw this concept here. And it's a bit chilling and mind-boggling, but it is a comment from the interview with the Solomons, who wrote a book on the Scole Experiment. This was conducted on Granada TV, I think from 2012, or at least that's when it was posted. And what they asked him about this image because they showed it, and they said, what we need to express is that, yes, it looks like a gray alien, like possibly a fuzzy, blurry version of what you might see on the communion book. But what they wanted to say is that this is not alien, that it's a possible, I think they said possible representation or version of what humans might be in the very distant future. That was fascinating. So what are you saying about that? In that, don't think of it as a gray alien. It is perhaps what we would evolve to tens of thousands of years, 100,000 years in the future, something like that.
Well, all I know is that the phrase interdimensional friends is kind of a chilling phrase.
Well, at least they're friends. They're friendly.
Yeah. But that implies a Scole group hadn't just built a phone line to the afterlife. They built like a subway station. And now things are coming through that didn't necessarily originate on Earth, even with what you said. Maybe it's just us from the future, but that still doesn't mean it originated on Earth, at least in that future. Now, that brings us back to the warning we hinted at and pretty much have been hinting at for the last 11 years. Because if you have travelers coming through and you have a machine that creates a hole in space-time, eventually someone's going to notice.
Yes, and they're not always nice neighbors, and it goes back to just some core ideas here. That one, that ties into people thinking that aliens really are us in the future, back in time to observe us. Also, perhaps life did not originate on Earth, and that our human species is an experiment, a hybridization, something developed off-world, or that we did, and we were planted here.
Yeah.
And then, if you want to get biblical, it goes to that the old passage here from Leviticus 19:31. Do not turn to mediums or seek out spiritists, for you will be defiled by them. I am the Lord your God.
I'm pretty sure that's what the folks at the Pentagon that are freaked out about UAP, I think they lean on that particular Leviticus.
Well, yeah, that's one of the core tenets. Now, Leviticus also has some other stuff that doesn't, let's say, make a lot of sense to us modern folks, but the idea that is also what they say about the rules of being kosher in the Bible. It's just a good idea.
Yeah.
It's not going to kill you, but look, if you want to stay safe, it's probably better not to go using the Ouija board.
Right.
Is that, yeah, you could do that. It may not kill you, but again, you don't know what you're going to get. So it's probably a better idea not to go poking around this because you don't know what you're dealing with. That's kind of the idea here. So,
well, the entities started dropping hints that the experiment was becoming unstable. They warned of interference from an interdimensional time wave and that their work was creating space-time problems.
ooh.
So we started with a ghost story. We moved into a detective story with the Society for Psychical Research, and now suddenly we're in a science fiction movie. We're staring at the face of what looks like an alien, and we're being told that the fabric of reality is starting to tear.
That's fascinating. I mean, I guess that's a logical conclusion to this story, because imagine like you're getting a feedback, and talk about a feedback loop. What does it, deteriorate into?
Yeah.
A really irritating noise. Just a screech, because that's what feedback is. So the skeptics here had spent 3 years trying to prove it was a fraud, but as 1998 rolled on, the Scole group faced a much bigger problem. It wasn't about proving it was real anymore. It was about surviving it.
This is totally a Stranger Things scenario, because when you gaze into the abyss, yes, sometimes the abyss gazes back, and sometimes it has big black eyes. Who or what exactly was on the other end of the line? That's going to wrap up episode 323 of Astonishing Legends. We'll be back next week with our final part of this series. Look for new episodes of the Dead Letter Office weekly on Tuesdays, and keep an eye on our Patreon for early and commercial-free versions of all of our shows and more.
Astonishing Legends is edited by Sarah Voorhees-Wendell at VW Sound. Our co-producer is Tess Feifel, who also leads our research efforts and manages our social media. And we're grateful for the hard work of our technical producer, Ed Vicola, behind the scenes. Special thanks to our announcer, John Boland, for lending his voice to our shows.
Hi, I'm Brandon Dalo, and I give permission to Astonishing Legends to use my voice.
Hi, I'm Fern Cito.
Galaxy-wide in perpetuity.
However they see fit.
DALO.
Spelling my name here.
I understand this is with no implied promise of present or future compensation.
Compensation.
Okay, ending this transmission.
Our theme, which is available as a ringtone, was composed by Judson Crane at foundermusic.com. All other music and sound design for the show is composed and created by Alan Carestia.
Our logo was created by Tommy Beaver Design, and our animated graphics for social media and YouTube are done by Joshua Sloan at deadstreetproductions.com.
Many episodes have transcripts available. For ones that don't, you can request them by emailing transcripts@astonishinglegends.com.
Astonishing Legends would not be possible without you, our listeners. Visit our store at astonishinglegends.com or interact with us and other listeners on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, Discord, and YouTube.
You can also visit us at patreon.com/astonishinglegends, where patrons have access to commercial-free versions of both the main show and the Dead Letter Office, as well as additional bonus content, including the Patreon-exclusive show, The Astonishing Junk Drawer. No part of this show may be reproduced anywhere without permission. Copyright Astonishing Legends Productions.
Good night.